Chapter 22 of Sweet Clover, A Romance of the White City, by Clara Louise Burnham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by E Tayaban. Chapter 22, On the Lagoon. Mildred and Jack, when they discovered that they had lost their companions, made no effort to find them. "It is a great bore for more than two to try to keep together in this place. Don't you think so?" asked Van Tassel. "It is very difficult, certainly," agreed the girl. "Isn't it strange to look about this wonder world of a street and realize that it is just the Midway Plaisance? Recall the old driveway at this hour." Yes, early evening was its most populous time, too. But even then, how quiet it was. What a wild idea it would have been to expect to see Turkish dancing girls, half-naked Dahomians, and all the rest, living in those still green fields. Have you been into Hagenbeck's and seen the marvelous trained animals? Yes, but it is a rather creepy pleasure to watch lions, tigers, bears, and leopards walking around that one solitary man and hissing threateningly at him even while they obey. The one moment when I found my breath short was when the trainer made 5 lions lie down on the ground and threw himself on his back upon them as though on a rug. He flung his arms out and caressed their great noses. I tell you, I didn't like him to let those beasts out from under his eyes. That was thrilling, I remember, but I felt for the lions sometimes too. I didn't like to see them demean themselves. When one had to hold the end of a rope in his teeth and swing it to let a hound jump, it seemed rather small business to demand of the king of the forest. When the two friends, stopping often by the way to watch some curious object of interest, reached the Japanese bazaar, they went in for a few minutes. By the time they emerged, the twilight had wholly faded. "See your kings of the forest!" exclaimed Jack. Mildred looked across the street. There, in midair, apparently suspended like Muhammad's coffin, the iron cage above the entrance to the Hagenbeck Arena was brilliant with electric light. 5 great lions were within, and the strange effect in the surrounding darkness was heightened when the trainer, whip in hand, entered and closed the door behind him. In a shorter time than it takes to tell it, Jack and Mildred found themselves in the center of an ever-growing crowd, all with upturned faces watching the wondrous apparition. The magnificent beasts glided lithely back and forth, watching the trainer, who, exciting them more and more by the whip which he cracked in the air, adroitly avoided being knocked down as they bounded about him, passing and repassing one another with increasing swiftness. "A great advertisement," remarked Jack. Then, as Mildred moved and turned her head, "Are you being uncomfortably crowded?" he asked. "Never mind, it is worth it," she said, rather breathlessly, as a big fellow, uncouth in his open-mouthed wonder, unconsciously shoved her against her companion. Van Tassel drew her in front of him and placed his arm between her and the countryman. The latter still pressed, but feeling an obstruction firm as a bar of iron, turned his admiring countenance vaguely around toward Van Tassel. "Well, he exclaimed. "Ever seen anything like that before? Wife and I never did. Them lions hangin' betwixt earth and heaven shaking their manes at that feller, and he dodgin' around out of their way as cool as a cucumber. It's wife's aim to tell the truth when we get home, and it's mine too. It's both our aims, but we might's well lie. There won't anybody believe this." "It is amazing," said Jack, "but you can see as well in one place as another. Would you kindly push the other way?" "They're a hunching us on this side, too," explained the man, then continued to gape, oblivious of his surroundings. The trainer placed a white and gold chair in the center of the cage and made one of the lions spring into it. The creature placed its powerful forepaws on the chair back and waved its graceful tail from side to side. Another of the beasts reared on its hind legs high above the trainer's head, resting its paws against the iron bars, and its roar resounded through the crowded street. The trainer motioned the sitting lion from the chair, shot a revolver twice into the air, left the cage, and lo, the wondering spectators were gazing into blank darkness. "Another dream over," said Jack into the ear so close to him. The tightly hemmed-in mass of humanity slowly dissolved into its integral parts. "They ought to have a packed house after that," remarked Mildred. "Shall we swell the number?" "Not unless you wish it." "I don't. I wish something else very much. Will you answer as meekly and civilly when I ask it?" They had begun again their walk eastward. "I don't know." "Oh, that is not encouraging." "It is wise, though. I was brought up never to be afraid to confess that I didn't know a thing. I want you to go with me in a gondola. Compare my humility with Robert Page's sang-froid." "A gondola will be even more difficult to catch by this time than a horse car," suggested the girl. Jack looked at her, but her piquant, smiling face taught him renewed patience. "Then you will not run much risk in promising," he answered. "Shall we leave it to fate to decide? If we find a gondola easily, will you go?" "Yes, indeed." As they left the Plaisance and came around the women's building, a sunburst of fire in the east illuminated the sky. "A salute to royalty," said Jack. "Queen Mildred has arrived." The white light faded, to be followed by dazzling green, ruby, and gold, as one bomb followed another, to burst above the lake and cast abroad in the heavens fountains of jewels that rained down in glittering showers. "Now, let us see if fate is good-natured," said Van Tassel, leading his companion toward the nearest gondola landing. A graceful willow hung above and obscured it. "I must laugh at you, Jack," said the girl, suiting the action to the word. "The idea of expecting to find a gondola now, way over here. Stranger things have happened. Suppose," suddenly standing still and looking down into her eyes, "suppose you should say that you wish it. Just for luck, you know." "I never wish for impossibilities." "Do you expect me to believe that?" "Well, I try not to." "But wish for this. You know it is possible to have strawberries in January." "What a great boy you are still, Jack. Very well. I wish that 2 gondoliers may have been attacked by an unusual access of laziness this evening, have denied their craft to all applicants, and skulked over here away from the crowd, and that they may be waiting for us now in the shadow of the willow. Any more midsummer madness you would like me to indulge in?" Van Tassel led her down the bank. "Behold," he said. "Mildred, what a witch you are! This is necromancy." The girl stood with lips parted, for the waiting gondoliers sent their graceful craft to her feet. She put her hand in Jack's and stepped within. In a moment Van Tassel was beside her, and they had glided away. The lagoon rippled in a light breeze. Along the edge of wooded island, the sedges dipped in the waves. Here and there on the bank, a group of water birds showed white, as a neighboring electric light touched the soft plumage beneath which their heads nestled. Jack wanted his companion to speak first, but she kept silence long. "Is the sorceress enjoying herself?" he asked gently at last. Mildred returned his gaze as she leaned back in her cushioned corner. "I am a philosopher," she answered. "I am being kidnapped, but I might as well enjoy it." "Well, that is pretty good, I should say. I don't want to hear anything you have to say. I am convinced that you are the most designing creature alive. Ask your minions to sing, please." Jack longed that he might know the thoughts that flitted white-winged through his companion's mind as their boat glided on to the gondolier's song. This ceased as they entered the court of honor, grown dusk now in preparation for the second playing of the electric fountains. Half the weary sightseers had gone home. No black crowd lined the railings around the grand basin. The rainbow jets sprang triumphant skyward. An invisible orchestra lent their colors richer meaning and beauty. "Do you remember the song that Clover sang last night?" asked Jack, leaning a little toward his companion. "It suddenly came to my mind then, as the water shot up. Those lines: 'I share the skylark's transport fine. I know the fountain's wayward yearning. I love, and the world is mine. Clover says that is a man's song. I don't agree with her. A woman may be angel enough to feel divine fullness of content simply in loving, but a man who loves must be loved again, or else feel that nothing is his. Nothing. There is no beggar so poor as he. Isn't it so? The earnest tone thrilled close to Mildred's cheek. She caught her breath quickly. I don't know, she said, nervously surprised. Still true to your bringing up, remarked her companion, controlling himself with a strong will as he felt her shrink, and leaning back with a short laugh. Not afraid to say you don't know, when such is the case. Well, I can only speak for myself. When I love, and am loved, I will agree with the poet. I would even sing with her if I could. For soft the hours repeat one story, sings the sea one strain divine. My clouds arise all flushed with glory. I love, and the world is mine. Mildred was startled. What a lover Jack would make. He was not Clover's. She was sure of it now, but the thought brought no elation, rather a new, timid humility, which made her seem strange to herself. She felt her companion's dark eyes upon her, and her usually ready tongue was mute. Van Tassel did not know whether to gather courage or alarm from her silence as they sat there side by side. The gondoliers slowly propelled the boat, keeping in view of the fountain's tossing banners of liquid light. "Tell me what you are thinking, Mildred," he urged at last. "I am not thinking. Do you ever come to such times? I do always in this spot. Perhaps it is because I have no thoughts to match such unearthly beauty. At all events, I never think here. I feel, I absorb. Yes, that is it," answered Jack simply. "Give me the Peristyle," said Mildred, "and what I can see from it, and sweep all the rest of the fare away if you like. I don't love many things in this world besides Mildred Bryant, but the Peristyle is one of them." It was a novel speech from her, and in a novel tone. The low cadence of her voice had lost the laughter or imperiousness which usually characterized it. Jack was silent for a time. "Are you warm enough?" he asked at last. "Yes, but I think we had better go home." "Aren't you comfortable?" "Oh, certainly, and it was very kind of you, Jack, to take so much trouble." This gentleness alarmed Van Tassel more than any amount of coldness or impertinence would have done, but he fought off dejection. "I have given you one thing, then, that you can't hand on to Clover," he said lightly. The fountains leapt a last time and fell, dropping lower and lower, till only the white sea foaming about Columbia's barge was left. Soft radiance again lit up water and sculpture. Mildred longed to be at home, and soon she and Jack entered a wagonette at Park Gate and were driven to the house. When they arrived, the orchestra at the hotel was playing the music of Carmen. "There is a delicate compliment to you, Jack," she suggested, as they ascended the steps. "Yes, but must you go right in?" For she showed symptoms of leaving him. "It has been a long day," she answered, lingering with an unusual gentle compliance from which he gathered no hope. "You are tired," he said, with tender contrition. "I have had you so long, and yet, when should I be ready to let you go? Oh, Mildred, is it any use?" He burst forth suddenly, in a low tone, seizing both her hands and holding them with painful tightness. A fluttering and wild, loud peeping came from the tangle of vines near which they stood, and a small dark object half fell, half flew down past their heads to the grass below. Mildred started. "It is Electra, a falling star." She laughed nervously. "I am glad she fell, else I might be crying now instead of laughing. It would be such a serious unhappiness to me if I should cause you pain, Jack," she added brokenly. "You are so different from anybody else." "I am answered," he said briefly and steadily, but he did not loosen her hands. "I am going to ask a great deal of you now, Mildred. Can you forget what I have said? I I am afraid not. Please try to. I will help you. Help me? Repeated the girl, bewildered. Yes, for everything between us shall be the same as before. Tomorrow morning you will say to yourself that you had a dream. That is all. Very well. The girl regarded him questioningly. I hope you are not thinking that I might speak of it. Jack threw his head back and gave an excited laugh before suddenly growing grave and gazing ardently into her eyes. Speak of it? What would it be to me, my darling, if everyone knew? He said with swift ardor. I love, but the world is not mine. That is the whole story, and the only peace for you is to forget it. Her head drooped under his look. I am dreadfully tired, Jack, she said faintly. Yes, dear, go, and forgive me. He kissed her hands passionately and released them. She passed into the house, her head and heart pulsing. Bewilderment was her chief sensation. The finality with which Jack seemed to accept defeat was so at variance with his manner. She stole upstairs silently to her room, closed the door, and turned up the light. Then she went to her mirror and questioned her own pale face with wistful eyes. I haven't expected it. I didn't know it was coming this time, she said, answering some thought. Is Jack really so unselfish as that? Can he care for me enough to, and then cover his disappointment with gaiety to save me pain? His loving words rang in her ears. Her hand still felt the wild pressure of his, and the warmth of his kisses. No one had ever received failure so before. No man had ever dared to call her darling. A look that was almost fear came into the eyes that gazed back from the mirror. How had Jack contrived to make himself seem victor instead of vanquished? He had not even pressed his suit. He had not begged her to try to love him. How nobly he had spared her, but how audaciously he had treated her! The color was flowing back to her cheeks. Mildred could no longer study that face in the glass. She turned away, weary, perplexed, troubled by the restless beating of her heart. I will get to sleep as quickly as possible. He told me to believe it a dream. I must try to take it all as Clover would. The thought of her sister was like calling up the image of a saint. She had not been the object of Jack's adoration after all. How strange, strange! How much better it would have been for him. Not that Clover would have married him, but it would have been good for him merely to love her. Fevers, perplexities could not come where Clover was, and with this thought came a great longing to breathe Clover's cool, wholesome atmosphere. Mildred slipped into a wrapper, and without pausing to think further, crossed to her door. There was but a dim light within. She spoke her sister's name very softly, not to wake her if possibly she might be asleep. But Clover herself in an instant opened the door. I thought I heard you come in, Millie. Why, what are you doing here, all dressed in the dark? Asked the younger, entering. Thinking, Clover laughed. It sounds amusing, doesn't it? But the music was pleasant, and my window especially enticing. I felt rather tired when I reached home a little while before you, and meant to be asleep by this time, but here I am, you see. Let me come and think too, said Mildred, or rather, let me come where I can't think. The two sisters sat down in the large bay window overlooking the lake. Haven't you had a pleasant day? Asked Clover. I've had all sorts of a day. How has yours been? Delightful. You are my despair, Clover. Things are always delightful to you. Clover heard the depression in her sister's voice and wondered. Her thoughts flew to Jack, too, and she questioned what mood the day might have left him in. Oh, no, she answered, but those nut-brown maids in the Javanese theater would put anyone into good humor. When they dance, you can no more help laughing than if you were being tickled with a feather. Such dear, cunning, absurd motions as they make, their little bits of mouths looking so serious all the time. You take such an interest in everything, said Mildred wistfully. It is because you have a heart at leisure from itself. I have never longed for that sort of a heart as I have today. For quite a while, it has been slowly dawning upon me that I am more self-centered than most people, but today Gorham Page gave me the final blow. Mr. Page? Why, you astonish me. He has a high opinion of you. He was saying today how much deeper and more earnest you were. For mercy's sake, exclaimed Mildred, flushing to her ears. Don't tell me what he said. Why? Are you too conscientious to accept a compliment when you haven't a trade? I have plenty of trades. Jack never talks about you without using superlatives. Dear Jack, he is far too appreciative, returned Clover, wishing it were light enough to see how her sister accepted this. But you haven't told me how Mr. Page hurt you. No, it was the truth that hurt me. Mr. Page is a very good representative of that, smiled Clover. We were coming out of old Vienna, and you and Jack fell behind to speak to one another, and I addressed Mr. Page. He looked at me vaguely, and answered at random. Well, it was the way that trifle affected me that made me see Mildred Bryant as I had never seen her before. I was deeply offended, yes, angry, that the important favor of a remark from my lips should be disregarded. Oh, Clover, the disgrace of it! The speaker's voice was unsteady, and she suddenly covered her face with her hands. Clover leaned forward and put a hand on her knee. Isn't it beautiful, she said earnestly, to find yourself shrinking from sin? It is so safe to condemn it in ourselves. Hatred of evil is only treacherous when we feel it for the mistakes of others. The worst of it was that I knew I should have felt less injured had it not been that other woman what was preoccupying his attention. He was thinking of you, and I resented it. I couldn't live if I didn't tell you. It proved to me that I was growing into a regular octopus. Everything must be absorbed to feed my vanity, and especially every man. Why, Mildred, I am so glad for you, said Clover simply, her cool tones falling on the other's scornful heat and extinguishing its fire. We have to come to these places, you know, for it mustn't be left in our badness, and a little light is let in at a time as we can bear it. But I can't bear it, exclaimed Mildred wildly, for it is second nature to me to be vain and exacting. You won't indulge it now. Yes, I shall. Not so carelessly as before. All this is what comes into the battle of life. One part of our dual nature loves our evils and the other hates them. You can have God's help if you ask it, you know, and you will find how little and how deceptive the progress will be that you make without him. Your battle seems won, Clover. I am in one of the peaceful places now, and I am very happy and grateful. I wasn't given your tempestuous nature, dear, so our experiences always are and will be different. The Father in mercy lets us develop as irresponsibly as the plants until we get such a glimpse into our souls as you had today. But then responsibility begins. It is sinning against light that warps and distorts us. I wonder if it would be good for me to be married, said Mildred musingly. When girls are married, they haven't much time to think about themselves. It is good for every girl to marry when she truly loves the man who is unexceptionable, returned Clover, smiling at her own triteness. But you remember the girl must ask herself, not, can I live with this man, but, can I live without him? Then I should certainly never marry. You didn't do that, Clover. Clover looked musingly out at the window. No, I didn't do that. I often think of that little ignorant girl who married dear Mr. Van Tassel. I don't know whether I did right or not, but at the time I thought I did, and that is all I have any concern with. But I was not in freedom. You are in freedom. The can I live without him ought to mean, can we be more useful together than we could apart? Why, you don't leave a girl any comfort in thinking about herself at all, complained Mildred, half in tears. There isn't much comfort in it, that is a fact, returned Clover, smiling. You are tired, dear. Go to bed now. They rose, and Mildred took the smaller woman in her arms, and their cheeks clung together. I am unhappy, Clover, she said, with plaintive surprise at the fact. It is so restful, replied the other, to think you have all eternity before you. Even if we only make a beginning here, it will be all right. I like your arms around me, said Mildred. Let me sleep with you tonight. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Sweet Clover, A Romance of the White City, by Clara Louise Burnham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by E Tayaban. Chapter 23, The Hotel Dance. It was Gorham Page's habit to drop in at the Van Tassel house before making his nearly daily visit to the fair. One morning, as he ascended the steps, his sister met him. I hoped you would come, she said. I want to be condoled with. Robert's foot has descended. We are going home. Oh, I am sorry, replied Gorham, taking the chair she offered him. But can't some arrangement be made? No, Robert has said positively, and when he says positively, I never waste any more nervous force. Poor dear boy, he wants to stay as badly as I do, but we have been here longer than we expected already, and after all I would rather go back than to give up the apartment and go to the poorhouse, which he says is the alternative. I must go to Boston before long, said Paige. Wouldn't you like to stay and go back with me? Let Robert go home alone. Yes. No, I thank you, with a firm shake of the head. I shouldn't care for the fair without Robert. That is nice, remarked Gorham, regarding her attentively. I think I should like my wife to feel like that. Hilda laughed. Oh, that vague and shadowy wife of yours. Once I believed in her. Too bad that such a good-natured matchmaker as I would have been should be burdened with such an impossible brother as you. I have lost all my interest in you and have transferred it to Jack. Gorham smiled pensively and struck the palm of one of his hands with the knuckles of the other. You think yourself very clever about Jack, don't you? It goes without saying that I am clever, of course, but this occasion does not demand much insight. If they were a trifle more secret in their chats in corners and their exchange of Masonic signals, I should think, perhaps, I was a treacherous guest to mention them. But they enjoy their little comedy, and are perfectly willing others should. I think it is unkind in them not to come out openly and allow me to give them my blessing before I go. I must say, Hilda, I don't enjoy hearing you use that tone about Mrs. Van Tassel. What is the matter with my tone? Asked Hilda. It is light, answered Paige, with grave simplicity. His sister stared a moment, then burst into laughter. What crotchet have you taken now? She asked. Doesn't the match please you? It is not a match. You are laboring under a false idea. If Mrs. Van Tassel should ever distinguish a man in the way you are speaking of, it will come to our knowledge in a different manner from the one you describe. We are talking in low tones in a corner now, but we are not sentimentally interested in one another. An unanswerable argument, said Hilda good-naturedly. You needn't take the matter au grand sérieux. I'm profoundly grateful to Mrs. Van Tassel, and think her one of the most charming women I ever knew. Page's countenance, which had been grave to sternness, relaxed until, slowly smiling, he looked into his companion's eyes and beamed mutely upon her. Hilda noted the change with private astonishment, and determined to experiment. She is so refined, she added after a pause. The perfection of refinement, said Page. And very graceful. Gorham nodded. It is a pleasure to see her move, is it not? She has plenty of spirit, too, and wit. Yes, indeed. In whatever company she is, she makes her mark. And it is never a black and blue one either, responded Hilda, passing her handkerchief over her lips as she returned the rapt gaze of the earnest face, drinking in her words. There is so much in that. Her wit could never hurt. Her uniform, considerate kindness is her most prominent trait. Yes, responded Page, faithfully antiphonal. Only a pure, true heart like hers could prompt such behavior. There is a subtle charm and stimulus in her society, and a restfulness, a satisfaction. It is hard to word it, but you have felt it. You recognize it. One can only say, it is good to be in her presence. Hilda pushed back her chair so suddenly that her companion started. Gorham Page, she said, gazing at him with sparkling eyes and rising. Don't you see what has happened? No, he answered, removing his fixed gaze and pushing aside the vines, the better to peer about. Not out there, exclaimed his sister. Oh, he answered mildly. I thought perhaps Blitzen had killed Electra. Mrs. Page burst into laughter. Peal after peal broke from her, and she clasped her hand to her side. Robert appeared on the scene. It is time you arrived, said Gorham, vaguely smiling. I haven't the least idea what ails Hilda. Mrs. Page dropped her head on her husband's shoulder. Gorham thought that perhaps Blitzen had killed Electra, she gasped. How intensely amusing, remarked Robert. This girl is tired to death, Gorham, he went on, patting his wife's convulsed shoulder. She thinks she doesn't want to go home, but I know it is time. Mrs. Van Tassel urges our remaining. What a spirit of sunshine she is. If there ever was an angel in a house, she is one. Hilda lifted her head to look at Gorham's face. She found it beaming upon his brother with tender delight, and falling back she relapsed into another spasm of laughter. Stop this, said her husband, giving her a little shake. I am really afraid Hilda isn't well, said Gorham with concern. I am sorry if she is too tired, for I wanted to see if you all wouldn't like to come over to the dance at the hotel tonight. That is sensible, profoundly sensible, remarked his brother. What could finish off a day at the fair more appropriately than a dancing party? You've got to go, Robert, said Hilda, wiping her eyes. It will be lovely. We will smoke on the piazza and watch the others through the windows. Yes, I know how you enjoy looking on at a dancing party. Yes, thank you, Gorham. We will come, continued Mrs. Page relentlessly. I shall just go down to the court of honor for one last look, she added, sighing. I will go up in that little balcony at the corner of the electrical building and gaze once more down the stately, spacious square. I shall see the peacock-blue lake through the columns of the Peristyle, look up into the Italian sky roofing all, and say my prayers or sing the doxology. Then I shall come home and pack. Oh, Robert, how can we leave it all? That evening Jack entered the parlor and found Clover leaning back in an armchair. He dropped into a seat beside her. You look fitter to adorn some marble shrine in the White City than to decorate a humdrum mortal home, he remarked, regarding her thin gown approvingly. I believe I never saw you before in a dress suit, she answered lazily. You look very neat, my dear. That is what Mother used to say to us to suppress our vanity when we were in festive array. It is rather amusing to see fair pilgrims in evening dress, isn't it? Where is Mildred? Asked Van Tassel, looking about. She will be here directly. If my sister were entirely costumed at any appointed time, I should be anxious about her. I haven't had a chance to confess before, went on Jack, low and hastily. I spoke to her too soon, after all. I need a keeper. Oh, Jack, I'm sorry. Clover looked dismayed, and her tone was heartfelt. The milk is spilled, though. There is no going back. Didn't she tell you? No, indeed. When did it happen? The night we took the gondola ride. Days since then. You are a wonder, Jack. Are you going to stay here and live it down? I am going to stay here if you will let me. Let you? It is your home. Oh, Jack, I am afraid of your tone. You haven't given up. I must tell you, though, that Mildred would be honest, uncompromisingly honest, in a serious matter like that. She is not a coquette. I know it. If she doesn't love you, you do not want her. I don't know whether she loves me or not, and I don't believe she knows any better. As his handsome, frank eyes looked up at her, Clover's heart swelled with the approval and admiration she felt. "We must relax to it," she said involuntarily. "Or brace up to it," he replied, with his brilliant smile. "But it is too late now for the Petruchio act, Clover. I have literally and figuratively given myself away." "Yes," said the other simply. "What you have to do now is to leave her in freedom. The Lord loves you both alike. If he does not give you Mildred, it will be because that marriage would stand in the way of your real advancement." "Do you really believe that?" Van Tassel regarded her in curiosity and surprise. "Why, Jack, think it out some time. How can it be any other way?" she answered, speaking hastily, for she heard a rustle on the stairs, and a moment after her voice ceased, Mildred came into the room. She was dressed in a pale violet gown, which revealed her superb neck, and she pulled long gloves up over her bare arms as she came. Jack sprang to his feet. How could she help liking the homage in his eyes? "I know I haven't kept you waiting," she said brightly, "for Mrs. Page's light is still burning, and of course it will take her some little time to wake up Mr. Page." Hilda's feet, in their little black satin slippers, came flying down the stairs as she spoke. "Is Robert in a hammock?" she exclaimed apprehensively. "I meant to stick them both full of pins, but I haven't had time. That poor dear man has done a lot today, in spite of all my warnings. I expect he will sleep from here to Boston when we get started. You two girls look perfectly lovely. I shall wake him up with that information." As they were all finally setting out, Gorham Page came up the walk. "I thought I would wander down and make sure of you," he said to Clover, as he turned back beside her. "You were sure of us," she returned. "I have not danced for 5 years. It seems to me I should never have thought of it again but for your invitation." "You do not care for amusement, then?" "Clover Bryant used to care greatly," she said, smiling. "But perhaps Mrs. Van Tassel has forgotten how to dance." They found the long, spacious piazza of the hotel gay with promenaders. Robert Page groaned. "How marvelous is the endurance of man and womankind," he remarked. "How many of these people do you suppose have been doing the fair today?" "You mustn't talk about the fair," returned his wife. "It is fortunate for you that the diversion came up, else I should have spent this evening weeping because I have said good-bye." "Have you come over here with the notion that I am going to dance?" asked Paige mildly. "No, I haven't the least idea you will. I wouldn't ask it, since you were foolish enough to tramp miles today." "How could I help that, my dear, with the awful last chance sensation hanging over me?" The orchestra in the hotel parlor began to play. Jack Van Tassel came up to where the husband and wife were sitting. "Are you going to dance, Hilda?" "Apparently not," she answered gaily. "Give me this, won't you?" "Oh, you don't need to. Why, where are Mildred and Clover?" "They are sitting over yonder. They have many friends here. It seems to me this is a rather peculiar way for you to treat my invitation." "No, Jack," said Paige, with a heart-rending sigh. "The old man will have to dance once. Let it be soon, as the song says. Come, my love, weary and footsore, let us tread the dreamy maze together." "Robert really wants to dance," said Hilda to Van Tassel confidentially. "The music inspires him. I haven't the heart to refuse. Thank you. Perhaps later we can have a turn." "Now, wasn't that sweet of Jack, and exactly like him?" asked Hilda, when they had drifted in among the floating couples. "He was afraid you were going to be immovable, and the very first dance, when of course you would suppose he would ask Mildred, or Mrs. Van Tassel, according to your theories. My dear, I am shaken on my theories. I may have been wrong. I hope I have been. What do you think, Robert?" "I can't tell any of my thoughts while I am dancing, Hilda. Don't ask it. If you do, I shall probably step on your foot. I have the greatest sympathy with a man who, when his partner insisted on talking to him in a round dance, replied as follows: 'Yes, 2, 3, 1, no, 3, 1, 2, yes,' and so forth." "What a goose you are, dear. But you dance as well as you ever did. if you have forgotten how to say sweet nothings during a waltz. Pray remember how much more breath I used to have. The spirit is willing still, but the flesh is too many for me. There go Gorham and Clover, said Mrs. Page with some excitement, pausing in the dance and taking her husband's willing arm. Robert, I want you to watch Gorham tonight, she added impressively. More mysteries, returned Page plaintively. I don't see anything out of the way about him. He is rather stunning in a dress suit. I wonder if Clover thinks so, responded Hilda significantly. Oh, you are only marrying him again, remarked her husband, with an air of enlightenment. If all your plans succeeded, I don't know what would become of Gorham. He couldn't even take refuge in Utah, for I understand the Mormons are discouraging plural marriages. You can chaff, Robert, but mark my words, some day you will look back to this evening and exclaim over my cleverness. I haven't told you all I know. I have proofs if I chose to. Yes, my dear, your fate is the common one of those who cry wolf too often. I've heard your proofs before. Then, squeezing his hand against his side, he added, There isn't another Hilda for poor Gorham, so how can I take a breathless interest in his prospects? Mrs. Page was mollified, of course, but she shrugged her shoulder. I don't understand how you can see those four people together and not weave romances. Now, for instance, I am burning to know why Mildred and Jack are not dancing this first dance together, instead of with Lieutenant Eames and his cousin. I dare say poor Jack lost his chance by coming to take care of me. But Hilda was wrong. A little circle of friends had gathered about Clover and Mildred as soon as they appeared on the hotel piazza, and Mildred saw at once in Jack's quiet withdrawal that he did not intend to ask any favor for himself. She liked this in theory, but it half vexed her to find herself alertly cognizant of his every movement, even while she chatted and laughed with her other friends. She saw him approach Hilda, and wondered if he were asking her to dance. Then, when the latter moved away into the hotel with her husband, Mildred talked volubly to Eames in order to prevent his having an opportunity to offer himself for her partner. These dances were informal. There were no printed programs. She wished to give Jack time to return to their group and claim her before the lieutenant should. How exasperatingly deliberate his motions seemed to her as he sauntered along. I can easily believe what you say, Mr. Eames, she said glibly. The papers print a great many of the amusing blunders that are made, and I am sure they are not exaggerated by my own experience. There were two women standing near me in front of the manufacturers building the other day, and one said to the other, Oh, look at that big statue of Liberty. Do you suppose it's solid gold? No, replied the other scornfully. It's holler. If that were solid gold, it would be worth $10,000. Then this sophisticated one turned to me. Can you tell me where the Court of Honor is? Is it in the administration building? I answered that this was the Court of Honor, and I suppose I gestured generally, for she looked down at the basin and then at me with a pitying smile. Oh, no, she said, that is the Lagoon. Why would Jack stop to look in at the window? How slow he was! Oh, yes, and Mr. Eames, was there any truth in that story I read about the battleship? Somebody says, you know, that although it looks so solid and impressive, an angry man could do it considerable damage with a crowbar, and I read lately about some country people who were visiting it. While they were exploring, the ship's bells rang, and coincidentally the whistle of a neighboring tug began to blow. The story said those poor people thought the boat was going to start and rushed for the gangplank, panic-stricken. One man fell into the water, and a woman broke her ankle. It ought not to be amusing, but it is. Ha ha, responded Eames. There is a grain of truth in it. Jack was drawing near. The rest is the reporter's imagination. I can tell you what was the foundation of that yarn. Jack approached and stood near the speaker. Won't you dance this with me, Miss Bryant, and I will initiate you into some of the methods of newspaper men as discovered by the officer of the day at Jackson Park. They moved away, and Helen Eames, who had audaciously escaped a would-be partner in the hope of this very event, fell to Jack's lot. She was a vivacious, jolly girl, and a man was not obliged to talk much while with her, so Van Tassel yielded to her determination to detain him at her side as long as was feasible. Mildred, promenading with her partner on the piazza after the dance, passed them sitting near the water where one could see, down the curve of the lake, the fireworks of the White City bursting in starry brilliance. Far out upon Michigan's breast shone a row of steady lights, beside which, as on a liquid boulevard, the illuminated passenger boats plied up and down. Van Tassel was playing with his companion's fan, and laughing as though he were well entertained, at the moment Mildred passed by. The sight did not please her. "It is all my monumental vanity," she thought. "I am glad Jack isn't one of the sort of men who stand around in corners and watch one tragically." She had danced several times when Clover, left near her by Gorham Page while he went to bring her a glass of water, addressed her. "You haven't danced with Jack once," she said, with hasty reproach. "Haven't I?" Mildred raised her eyebrows. "But aren't you going to, dear?" "Not unless he asks me, darling." Clover stared, then turned away to smile. She had not often seen Mildred in such an ill humor. "Poor, dear, unconscious Petruchio," she reflected. "I wonder if he is building better than he knows." Here Page returned with the water, and she could say no more, even if she wished. Moreover, Gorham now addressed Mildred, to claim the dance for which the strains of the Washington Post march were already sounding assertively. Jack had this two-step with Hilda, and when it was over he brought her to a seat near those which Mildred and Gorham had taken on the piazza. "Mildred," remarked Hilda, "this young man does know how to dance." Van Tassel bowed until the parting in his hair was visible. "That is nice," returned Miss Bryant languidly. "The fireworks are over," continued Hilda. "That awful word, nevermore, is hanging over everything for me tonight. I meant to be out here to see the last piece, but I wasn't. That superb volcano, or mine, or whatever name they tried to describe it by. I want you all to think of me with compassion every time you see it hereafter. Where do you suppose Robert is?" "Perhaps I ought to know," suggested Gorham. "I will hunt him up if you will allow me, Miss Mildred." "I'll go with you," said Mrs. Page. "It is rather cool here to sit still after dancing. You will excuse me, Jack. I think I ought to let poor Robert off now and take him home." It was the first time Mildred and Jack had been alone together since the memorable evening. "May I have the next dance?" asked Van Tassel abruptly. "If you like," answered the girl carelessly. "Haven't you had enough dancing?" "I haven't had any," he answered briefly, and Mildred told herself that the demon of her vanity had received what it craved, so warm a sensation of satisfaction stole around her heart. "I thought I would make myself safe before one of your other friends espied you here, but if you are tired—" "I am never tired, physically," said the girl, with a slow smile. "I was only going to say that I would be content to sit out the next with you, although we have not danced together since that night in the boathouse." Jack smiled. "Do you remember what you told me?" "Oh, yes. You made that child very happy. She owes you a dance." "These surroundings are strange. Have you been thinking of it?" "Yes. Only last year this ground was a tangle of goldenrod and willow trees. How many times have we gone bathing on that beach? It was as good a playground for jolly youngsters as could be imagined. And now—" She paused. "Now the music has commenced," suggested Jack, rising. "In consideration of the manner in which I have effaced myself so far, you should allow our dance to begin promptly." They entered the parlor by the door which leads from the east piazza. She put her hand in his, and they glided away over the polished floor among the pillars with their vine-like wreaths of electric lights. Amid the scattering groups which, outside, watched the dancers through the windows, was one spectator who was seeing a conventional dance party for the first time in her life. It had suddenly occurred to Robert Page that it would be worth the exertion of going after Aunt Love to see her view this pretty scene, and when Hilda and Gorham reached the front entrance of the hotel in their search for Robert, they found him ascending the steps with Miss Barry. "The young ladies did ask me if I didn't want to come over, and I thought I should feel out of place," she said. But Mr. Page, he just made me, so here I am." "Now come to this window," said Robert, "and tell me what you think of that." The others clustered around Miss Lavina as she murmured and exclaimed in her surprise. "I never approved of dancin'," she said. "I never saw any before. Mr. Gorham, do you remember that hall in the New York buildin'? That must be temptin' to young critters when it's lighted up and the music's a playin'. Why," eagerly, "see Miss Mildred and Mr. Jack. My, don't they go pretty? And there's Mrs. Van Tassel herself and some feller. Why," turning suddenly upon Gorham, "why ain't you in there dancin' with her?" "I have danced with her twice," he answered. "I mustn't be a monopolist, although it is a temptation. She is by far the best dancer here." Upon this, Hilda pressed her small satin shoe against her husband's foot, and he obtusely moved it out of her way. "Well, I declare," exclaimed Miss Barry, gazing in ever-warming admiration, "if it ain't enough to make a body want to be young and pretty. To think this is the real wicked thing itself, and I ain't shocked. What's the matter with me, Mr. Gorham?" "Considering your prejudices and traditions, it is a little odd. Perhaps it is because you cannot associate an idea of evil with anything you see Mrs. Van Tassel engaging in." Here Mrs. Page again endeavored to gain her lord's sympathy, with the result that he ejaculated, "Where would you like to have me put my feet, Hilda?" "Why don't you go in there and dance, Mr. Gorham?" pursued Miss Barry. "Am I so young and pretty that you want to see me? Well, if Hilda is willing to favor me—" "Oh, certainly, so long as Robert doesn't care to go home. Au revoir, dears." "Now then," Aunt Love turned upon her companion argumentatively, "are you perfectly willin' a man should put his arm around your wife's waist? On the contrary, I should object seriously. How about that, then?" Miss Barry gestured toward the hall. "For a man to place his hand on a woman's waist to steady and support her is not to put his arm around her. There are too many other things for a couple to think of in guiding themselves successfully through a crowd of dancers to allow of their usually being conscious of the intimacy of their position. Don't be afraid to admire the dancing, Aunt Love. It can be abused, like anything else, but it is an excellent exercise, inculcating grace, strength, and good manners. Well, now, I'm going to tell some folks I know what you say. Ain't your wife just as light as a fairy? And don't your brother look handsome tonight? No, sir, there ain't any folks here as good-looking as ours." When the waltz was finished, Gorham Page and Hilda approached Clover and told her that Aunt Love was without. She excused herself from her partner to go with them, and soon afterward Gorham walked home with her. "Thank you so much for coming," he said, when he was bidding her good night. "I am sure we all have to thank you," she answered. "Isn't it hard to be reconciled to letting your brother and Hilda go? We have been such a pleasant party." "Yes," returned Paige, looking down at her as she stood in her white wrap, an unconsciously adoring expression in his eyes. "This summer is an experience that one could wish would never end. Going away," he smiled vaguely, "leaving you, having these weeks come to an end, is almost as difficult to grasp in prospect as the thought of death." Clover laughed softly. "We won't borrow trouble," she said. "Good night." End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Sweet Clover, A Romance of the White City, by Clara Louise Burnham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by E Tayaban. Chapter 24, Dress Parade. "Do you think Jack enjoyed himself?" asked Clover, when her sister crossed the hall to her room that night for the usual last word before retiring. "I suppose he did. How anxious you are about Jack all the time. You make an absolute fetish of him. It used to mislead me." "Did it?" Clover smiled and turned back to her dressing table. "Yes, indeed, and no wonder. It is a good thing, however, that I was mistaken, else I'm sure there would have been coffee and pistols ordered for two. I want your opinion, Clover, on a delicate question. Supposing a man of some strength of character spends a whole evening at a dance, following about after a woman, smiling pensively at her face, or the back of her head, or her shoulder, or whatever of her he can get to smile at, and finding spots of vantage from which he can behold her dance when he is not dancing with her himself. Suppose he flies about to bring her glasses of water, and wraps, and fans, and performs all the other offices which are usually the privilege of her partners, driving said partners to the last pitch of exasperation. What, I ask you, is the matter with that man? Clover turned her tender glance upon her sister, marveling that the spirit of mischief could be so rampant in her eyes. Dear, she said reproachfully, that man is very deeply in love. That is what I supposed myself, replied Mildred demurely, but I wanted to be sure I didn't exaggerate. Too seriously so for you to make merry over it, continued Clover, shaking her head. Well, if you aren't a pair of you, exclaimed Mildred, bursting into laughter, which she endeavored to repress out of consideration of the lateness of the hour. Then she seized her sister's astonished face between her hands and kissed her repeatedly. I suppose there isn't another man in the world beside Jack Van Tassel, is there? How glad I am not attached to him. I should be wildly jealous. Oh, let me go, Mildred. I didn't know what you meant. I didn't know that anyone noticed. Clover was as red as her namesake, and looking everywhere except at her sister. Noticed? Why, my dear, he was a perfect spectacle. I fancy everybody in the room noticed except himself. He doesn't know what is the matter with him either. He asked me once, when we were out on the piazza, if there wasn't some malaria here. He isn't able to sleep of late, and his appetite isn't right. Mildred went off into a peal of laughter. Hush, do please hush, Milly, implored poor crimson Clover in an agony. Supposing Hilda should hear you and come in. She will. Oh, please. He said he thought he should take— Oh dear, I'm hurting myself. He thought he should take quinine. Mildred wiped her eyes. And I said, I was of the opinion, oh my, that something sweet would help him more. Extract of clover, perhaps? Mildred, tell me instantly you didn't say that. Well, not quite so much as that, but he tempted me dreadfully. Go to bed, Milly. Go to bed straight off. It is late. All right, but isn't it funny? Pleadingly. No, I do not think it funny at all. Oh, you must. That big, absent man, vainly mooning around among his data. Well, if you will only go away. Perhaps it's a little. There, I have turned the gas out. You will have to go. I am about to set up a Gorham to match your Jack, said Mildred irrepressibly. I am going to see that you treat the poor man right, and help him diagnose his symptoms. I am going to give you reproachful glances and him tender ones. I shall have to tell him they're tender, though. But here Clover succeeded in pushing her over the threshold and closing the door upon her. The following day, Mr. and Mrs. Page took their departure, the latter more reluctant than ever to leave so many objects of interest. Ain't it lonely without 'em? Said Aunt Love that night to Clover, after dinner. I don't know what you'll want to ask Mr. Gorham over here to help fill up the gap, she suggested rather timidly. No, I think we won't disturb his arrangements, replied Clover quietly. I suppose he can't stay here very much longer anyway. Miss Barry went to the back door to give Blitzen and Electra their supper, and arbitrate between them while they ate it. She won't ask him over. She soliloquized, arranging 2 dishes of scraps, while the 2 pets barked and chirped expectantly. Then she seated herself on a step to watch their proceedings. That looks like it, she continued in her own thoughts. Well, if this is what he's been waiting for, 30-odd years, I don't feel to blame him. Now, you get back, Electry. Blitzen ain't a-going to stand everything. Sometimes it does seem's if you had the most cheek of any critter in feathers. Well, look at that now. For Blitzen, exasperated at a raid upon his plate, jumped at the chicken, who quick as thought hopped on his back and clung to her perch by means of claw and wing while the terrier raced in a mad circle. Aunt Love's hearty laugh rang out as she watched Blitzen's fruitless efforts to disembarrass himself. At last he lay down and rolled over, and Electra, squawking excitedly, ran back to her plate. She was not pursued. The terrier ever afterward regarded her as something uncanny, and so far as possible refrained from acknowledging her existence. An event of general interest during the fair summer was the visit to the exposition of the West Point cadets. Crow Nest itself is scarcely more immovable from its position among the highlands of the Hudson than these pets of Uncle Sam, but it is a matter of history that they and their paraphernalia were transferred to the Philadelphia Centennial, and now again with much form and ceremony, their camp was set up in the green plain adjoining the government building on the shore of Lake Michigan. They arrived one dazzling afternoon, which began serenely calm, but toward evening gave the guests a northeast wind, which sent white-capped waves rushing landward and shook the tents in the new company streets. Starting from the terminal station, the young soldiers marched through the streets of the White City, preceded by their famous band, and as they proceeded looked neither to the right nor the left at the widely noised marvels surrounding them, but kept eyes front as though still treading their own quiet elm-lined avenues, while the waiting crowds cheered and cheered again, the elegant precision of their movements. In an hour, gray-coated sentinels were again walking post in this new Camp Sheridan, alertly conscious of their routine business, and apparently without a thought of the surroundings beyond the camp. Mildred Bryant felt considerable interest in the cadets and assumed much more. Helen Eames says that no matter how good a time a girl may have, she can never have as good a one as if she spent a summer at West Point, she announced to Van Tassel one day, on the occasion of their being together. She felt that he made these occasions rare, and at times the fact touched her. At others she said to herself, "He is getting over it." "Then why don't you go there?" asked Jack. "I don't know who has a better right to the flowers of life." "I did think of getting Clover to take me next summer, but now, wonder of wonders, the mountain has come to Mahomet. Don't you want to go down to parade tonight?" "Yes. I don't know just how to make you comfortable, though. The mob is something marvelous. I looked over their heads a minute last night, but being in the 6th or 7th row, concluded the game wasn't worth the candle." "Ah, that is where the convenience comes in of having a military friend," returned Mildred gaily. "We shall not need to mingle with the hoi polloi. Won't you come too, Clover?" as her sister entered the room. "Where?" "To see dress parade this evening." "Yes, I am going. Mr. Page has already asked me." "I don't believe you had better try to get along without me. Jack and I are going to meet Mr. Eames on the steps of the Army Hospital at 6:15. There is a great crowd." "Thank you. Perhaps we will be there. Did you hear Aunt Love's comment last night? She said that in the afternoon she ran into an impassable throng near the Administration Plaza, and after vainly trying a long time to get through, she finally found the attraction was only a lot of schoolboys drilling. If those important young heroes could have heard her scornful tone." When Clover had left the room, Jack spoke again. "Since you have an appointment with Eames, I withdraw, Mildred. I don't see why you asked me." "He said I might bring my friends," she replied. "Do come, Jack." Van Tassel looked straight into her eyes and smiled with an expression which seemed to the girl both brave and hopeless. "Won't you?" she persisted. "Of course," he answered. In the afternoon, Clover walked to the park, and entering back of Texas, walked down the northern avenue of state buildings. The usual crowd was flocking in and out of Mount Vernon, but she crossed the street to New Jersey's charming home and entered. It was entertaining a large number of sightseers, notebook in hand, who jotted down their inventories. Clover wished she might look over the shoulder of one woman, with a harassed but determined countenance, whom she met in the cozy west room downstairs. She wondered how this anxious one would be able to transfer to paper the charm of its quiet comfort, with the breezy foliage waving near its half-closed green blinds and casting shadows on the dainty white curtains. It was all familiar ground to Clover, so she went upstairs and seated herself in a corner of the deep, luxurious sofa, which commanded a view down through the open gallery of the front door. People came, looked, commented, passed into the dainty blue chintz bedroom, emerged smiling, and went away. Many had appeared, climbing the stairway with various degrees of toil, before the figure she awaited came into view. This one sprang up the steps alertly, with a serious expression, which brightened to pleasure at sight of her. "Have I kept you waiting?" he asked eagerly. "I came around from the Cliff Dwellers by the intramural road, and we had a stoppage of several minutes. I have been very anxious." "I am sorry for that," answered Clover, as Page seated himself beside her. "I thought you knew that I am always content in this house. I should move down here and live if they would let me. I have been fancying that I was holding a reception as the visitors came and went. I wonder if any pilgrim to the fair has a soul so dead as not to covet this house." "I didn't know you liked it so much," said Gorham, as though the fact were of serious importance. "Perhaps you would enjoy having tea here." "Tea in the New Jersey building? What a pleasure! But why do you tantalize me?" "I think we can. The lady manager from New Jersey is a near relative of mine. Excuse me a minute, and I will try the magic of her name." Page went downstairs, and in 5 minutes returned. "The house is mine, practically," he declared, smiling. "I herewith present it to you." "How delightful! And the tea?" "Is nearby." Gorham went to one of the locked doors on the east side of the hall and knocked. Presently he ushered Clover into this exclusive nook, and the door closed behind them. It was an appetizing little supper that was shortly set before them on the daintily clothed round table. "You have gratified one of my pet ambitions," said Clover. "Now I shall always feel a small proprietorship as well as a great affection for this house. I am really breaking bread at its board." "You spoil your friends by the pleasure you make it to contribute a little to your happiness," returned Gorham, his eyes resting upon her with the utmost satisfaction. "This room is as charming as the rest," remarked Clover, looking about at its ruddy decorations. "And the remoteness one feels from everything confusing, or noisy, or soiling, can only be appreciated by those who do not live in the midst of a large, well-kept park. I amused myself while waiting for you by searching for the fewest words that will describe the faces of fair visitors. I decided upon tired and pleased, not delighted. They are too weary for that, but just pleased." Page looked away and considered the idea, as Clover had intended he should. "Do you know Mildred gives us the opportunity to find good places at parade under Mr. Eames' wing?" she suggested after a minute. "Oh, I am glad to hear that. I don't quite understand what makes the cadets such a fad. No, one can't call it a fad either, for there is no sudden interest in them. They are always lionized. Since they have been here, I notice that people go hours before the time for parade for the sake of securing good places, and then wait patiently. So I have been wondering this afternoon how I could fix it for you to get a view of the ceremonies. It will be very pleasant to have Mr. Eames' assistance." "Then comes in that awful word again," laughed Clover. "We shall have to hurry a little." Page sighed unconsciously. "Is this very good tea?" he asked, as they finally rose from the table. "I am not a connoisseur." "Very nice indeed." "I thought it must be. I never enjoyed any tea so much in my life." "Then we are very much obliged to each other, aren't we?" said Clover gaily, and consuming her watch, she reminded her companion again of the hour of the appointment, and they hastened away. They arrived at the hospital steps just as the others were leaving. "Oh, you loiterers," was Mildred's greeting. "Don't you see our breathless condition?" returned Clover. "How can you have the heart to reproach us? How do you do, Mr. Eames? We are very grateful to you. What a hopeless throng that looks like! Let me take some of those camp chairs. said Gorham, suiting the action to the word. Mr. Eames led his party toward the officers' tents. They had to force their way through serried ranks of gazers, who were held back with difficulty by the blue-coated sentinels from the camp of regulars nearby. The sentinel saluted Eames as he passed, and the lieutenant stood still and allowed his friends to file before him to the reserved places before the officers' tents. There they found Helen Eames, who welcomed them radiantly, fixing cordial eyes on Jack in a manner not lost upon Mildred. The latter did not enjoy this effusiveness. She did not wish to marry anybody, but at the same time she did not like to have any other girl try to appropriate her especial friends. However, her attention was soon momentarily distracted by the novel sights before her, and the usual questions began to flow. Eames was most willing to answer them. Before long, the band marched out upon the plain, and the evening ceremonies had begun. The cadets, a shining assembly, marched forth from the company streets and fell into line. The band, playing the Thunderer, marched up and down the plain before the motionless ranks, and one to whom the West Point forms were familiar asked himself if it must not all be a dream. Here were the same camp, the same cadets, the same band, but where were the mountains, the huge old elms, the river? Instead, the government building, the fisheries, the battleship, and Lake Michigan. To Mildred, the very sight of the band was not thrilling from all it implied, but she soon found herself absorbed in interest and admiration. Once she turned around to Jack, who stood behind her. "I think I must go to West Point after all." "Indeed, you must. It is perfectly lovely," exclaimed Miss Eames. "There, you see, that is the adjutant now, advancing to the officer in charge." And she proceeded volubly to explain the tactics which followed. "I think I shall have to know some cadets," remarked Mildred, turning to Eames. "That will be very easy, and when you know one, you will know all. They can talk only on one subject," was the rather stiff reply. Mildred was perfectly aware that the young lieutenant admired her. She saw that her proposition was displeasing to him, but what she did not know was that he had not yet recovered from that profound fall which results from exchanging the chevrons of a first-class man for the shoulder-straps of a second lieutenant. That young officer must indeed have a seared conscience who can lay his hand on his heart and declare that he entertains only cordial sentiments for a cadet of the first class when their ways chance to cross. "You refused to attend the cadet ball with me at the New York building tonight," added Eames reproachfully. "Why, of course. In my ignorance. Wasn't it stupid of me? Oh, what are they running for? Isn't that pretty? Wouldn't you like to be a cadet again, Mr. Eames?" "Heaven forbid!" ejaculated that officer devoutly. "I am waked up by reveille yet. Hope I shall get over it some time." "Mildred is contracting cadet fever, Mr. Van Tassel," declared Helen, looking up at Jack in a way which Miss Bryant noted resentfully, in spite of her preoccupation. "I never before noticed how objectionable Helen's ways with men are," she thought. "I know Jack wishes she wouldn't look at him like that." "I suppose so, Miss Eames," replied Van Tassel. "I am trying to find out what it is that is so fetching about those all-conquering youngsters." But Jack need not have tried. No male civilian under 40 was ever known to discover. "What is cadet fever?" asked Mildred. "And what is the microbe? A bell button? I haven't one yet." The double-timing companies had retreated down the streets of camp, and the cheering crowds of spectators quieted. Many of them moved toward the lake shore, for in a short time it had been learned that the cadets would next march to supper preceded by the drum corps, and any ceremony which they performed, no matter how simple, drew a curious throng. "What is the matter? What are they going to do now?" asked Mildred. "Going to the clam bake to supper," replied Eames. "Then I am going to the clam bake to supper," announced Miss Bryant. "I think you would not enjoy it," said Eames shortly. "I know I shall," responded Mildred, with her glorious smile. "I am so sorry I shall have to leave you," remarked Helen. I have a number of friends among the first class. They were yearlings when I was at the post. I have promised to attend the festivities with one of them tonight. Do come and see me, Mr. Van Tassel, holding out her hand. Remember, you owe me a game of tennis. I assure you, you would not beat all the time. Are you coming with me, Fred? I believe not, unless you want me. If these people are determined to go to the clam bake, I think I shall have to go too. But remember, you are to save a two-step for me tonight. Au revoir, then. And Miss Eames, her last glance for Jack, moved away. We won't go with Mildred, said Clover, for we have had tea recently and aren't hungry yet. You would never guess where, either. Goodbye, Mr. Eames. We are all greatly indebted to you. Indeed we are, said Gorham, shaking hands cordially with the lieutenant. That was a most interesting sight. I congratulate you on being one fit to survive that tremendous training. This is the show side, but I know something of the other. Where did you have tea? Where? Demanded Mildred, smiling into Gorham's serious face. He instantly smiled back. Those cold, abstracted eyes of Page's had learned a new look recently, as though so much sunshine had warmed his heart that there was an overflow. It would make you so discontented with the clam bake, dear, suggested Clover, with mischievous deprecation. Why, I will know. The New Jersey house. You selfish creatures! Aren't they? Exclaimed Mildred, calling upon Eames and Van Tassel to witness. Yes, we are, laughed Gorham, as he and Clover turned away. We know it. Mildred, her companions on either side of her, began her walk northward. Eames wished cordially that Jack would remember an engagement. Jack wished sincerely that he knew what Mildred wanted him to do. Unconsciously fulfilling the lieutenant's desire, he spoke. I suppose I really ought to be at home attending to some correspondence I have been putting off, instead of loitering at the clam bake. Eames answered without giving Mildred time to speak. I shall be most happy to take Miss Bryant home after her curiosity is satisfied. Van Tassel's jealous ears detected the eagerness in his polite tone. But supposing my curiosity is not gratified by the time you are obliged to go and array yourself gorgeously for the evening. No, Jack, I am sorry for you, but Mr. Eames is engaged elsewhere. It need not be for some hours yet, protested the lieutenant. Mildred shook her head firmly. I couldn't think of allowing you to assume the care of me, in addition to all your other responsibilities this evening. Very well, said Jack. When it comes to a matter of letter writing, my conscience never requires very much soothing. When they reached the clam bake, two cadets were just issuing therefrom. Their hands went up in an instant salute to Eames, who had for the moment preceded his friends. I suppose there is a great deal of eating and running being done tonight, remarked Jack. But where are they? Asked Mildred aggrievedly, as they entered the busy, noisy eating room. The cadets mess upstairs, returned Eames, with latent satisfaction. Did you suppose they fell in here with a general company? You don't know much of military discipline, Miss Bryant. Never mind. If they are going to run up and down that staircase all the time, as they are doing now, I shall see a great deal of them. There isn't much order tonight, remarked the lieutenant. The cadets own the fair for the moment, and permits have been issued ad libitum. But supper had scarcely been brought to the three friends when, with a grand clatter on the bare staircase, the remainder of the corps came hurrying down, walked out the door, and quickly forming in ranks marched back to camp. Now, does that pay for mingling in this drove of people and getting half served? Asked Jack, with disdain. Fully, exclaimed Miss Bryant, with enthusiasm. Without those absurd straps around their faces, one can see what beautiful creatures they are. Well, I'm glad, returned Van Tassel shortly. I am resigned to your interest in the cadets, said Eames, if it brings you to West Point, for I am likely to get a detail there next year. Jack took no part in the animated discussion that followed. Don't look bored, Jack, said Mildred at last. Ask Mr. Eames questions, as I do. There isn't any need. You have covered the ground. You are mistaken about my being bored. This is my expression when I am absorbing stimulating information. Then he should abstain from stimulants. Don't you think so, Mr. Eames? They arose from the table, and going out into the arc-lighted street, walked slowly west. When they reached Brazil, Mildred declared her desire to go into the building. I suppose I ought to leave you, said Eames reluctantly, but perhaps if you remain in the grounds I may meet you again. What is going on? Asked Van Tassel. Several things. A procession of illuminated boats in honor of the cadets, a concert by the West Point Band outside the Michigan House, illumination of all the state buildings and dancing in many of them, but notably New York, all for the cadets. You will be likely to hear enough of those young men and see enough of them if you remain, Van Tassel. Oh, we can't, smiled Mildred demurely, as she gave her hand to the lieutenant. We have important letters to write. The we, even in jest, was music to Jack. He turned to her as they ascended Brazil's steps. Well, are you ready to come back to civil life? Haven't I been civil all the time? And you, reproachfully, were going to leave me. Only out of regard to Eames. I think you might have more regard for me than for him. I have. I thought you knew it. Mildred did not answer. They had reached the large salon, which was the second floor of Brazil's home, and from thence ascended the spiral iron staircase leading to the roof. Mounting another short flight of steps, they entered one of the 4 towers, and standing between its white pillars, looked down on the enchanting vision of early evening in the white city, the sum of imaginable loveliness. The imposing facades of its palaces were now pure but not dazzling. The green trees and flowering shrubs of Wooded Island were hung with thousands of fairy lights. The long, bridge-spanned canals wound away into distant, mysterious vistas, where tower on tower still rose far as the eye could discern, and queen above all stood the flamy curves of the coronet of administration. The columns of the art palace were mirrored in the lagoon, and near and far upon the water's breast lay little boats, gay with lights, in readiness for the procession soon to take place, their chains of colored globes faithfully reflected in the depths below. Distant bells were chiming. From one of the boats, the tinkling melody of a mandolin floated up to the watchers in the lofty tower. All else was still, as though the peerless scene were indeed something supernatural, evoked for a moment's breathless rapture, and fated to disappear forever. Neither Mildred nor her companion spoke for a time. Once you gave me your hand when we lived such an experience as this together, said Jack at last, withdrawing his gaze and looking at Mildred in the twilight. She hesitated, then extended her hand frankly. So I will again, she answered, with an effort at her old air of good comradeship. I am a great believer in handshaking. Van Tassel only looked at her without accepting the favor, and shook his head slowly. No, he said, as though to himself. I cannot be satisfied with it. Mildred blushed as her hand dropped. You said, she returned low and swiftly, that everything should be as it was before. Yes, I did, because I was inexperienced. I have never been in love with anyone else, and I didn't know how it was going to be. I have become better acquainted with myself since that night, and can speak with more intelligence. I find myself hoping, even though I say over every day, that there cannot be the slightest hope for me, because you know me well, and by this time the truth would be evident to you. If it were in my favor, you would tell me, wouldn't you? The girl gave him one fearful glance and looked away. You would, of course, he said, with sudden excitement, seizing the hand he had refused. Mildred, I love you. I love you. I do not say it to you every hour, but I think it with every breath. You would not make me wait one moment if— Oh, how can you, Jack? Why must you love a girl so unworthy? She shrank closer to the railing. I told you. I tried to warn you. I told you that I do not love anybody but Mildred Bryant. Before she ceased speaking, Van Tassel had released her and recovered himself. "And the peristyle," he added steadily. "You are forgetting that." She did not smile, and her lips quivered. "So long as my only rivals are your sweet self and the Indians, helmsmen, et al., who view the country from the top of the peristyle, I cannot despair. Perhaps I ought to, dear, but I can't." Mildred wondered if her companion were really so pale as the shadows made him appear. "Hope springs eternal in the human breast, and I am going to hope until you announce your engagement to me. Then, until I receive your wedding cards, I shall look to see you find that engagement a mistake. And if you are married—" Jack paused. "I don't know. My mind turns blank when it occurs to me that you might marry another man." "I am not worth it. I am not worth it," repeated the girl. "Have I made you unhappy? Shall I go away? Will my presence be a burden to you now?" "No." Mildred looked at him piteously. "I think I have a stone in here instead of a heart," she said, pressing her side. "But stay with me and keep the others away. I don't need to tell you how much I like you, Jack. If only it were safe to say what you want me to when I only like you and value you and respect you more than any other man." She paused, unable to proceed. He turned to her, tender consideration in his tone. "That is a great deal, Mildred. I must try not to forfeit it." End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Sweet Clover, A Romance of the White City, by Clara Louise Burnham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by E Tayaban. Chapter 25, In the Peristyle. The next morning, before 7 o'clock, Miss Barry, while busy arranging matters in the dining room preparatory to breakfast, was summoned by a maid to the back door with the word that a gentleman wished to see her. To her great surprise, it was Gorham Page who stood waiting on the path. "Well, well, Mr. Gorham, ain't the days long enough for you?" she asked, smiling, as she came out of the door. "This is new manners for you. Go away, Blitzen. Look out, Mr. Gorham, his paws must be wet." "I didn't want to disturb the house by ringing the bell," explained Page, "and I knew you would be likely to be about by this time. A very unfortunate thing has occurred." He looked annoyed as he spoke. "I have received a sudden call to St. Louis by a client I cannot neglect, and the business requires that I should spend the whole day in town before I go. Mrs. Van Tassel has promised to go down to the fair with me this morning on the whaleback. I want you to explain to her how seriously I regret breaking the engagement. I am really very much put out by the necessity." Miss Lavina smiled as she broke a twig from the maple under which they were standing. "Ain't you coming back at all?" she asked. "Why, certainly I am coming back," replied the other severely. "Oh," remarked Miss Barry innocently. "I thought perhaps you wanted me to say good-bye to him for you. No, indeed, nothing of that kind. I may be detained a week or 10 days, but I wanted Mrs. Van Tassel to understand that no trivial circumstance would deter me from taking the boat trip with her and Miss Bryant as we planned. I would give a great deal not to be obliged to leave. Mrs. Van Tassel won't lay it up against you," remarked Miss Barry. "No, I dare say not," said Page abstractedly. "I mustn't wait," he exclaimed after a moment's reverie. "Tell her, Aunt Love, how sorry I am. Put it strong. I thought I would see you instead of leaving a note, for writing is so formal. And oh, by the way, tell her if she forgives me and understands the situation, how glad it would make me to receive a word from her to that effect. This is my address," thrusting a card into Miss Barry's hand. "What's the use?" asked Miss Lavina, her shoulders shaking in a laugh. "You know you're always forgetting girls. If you should get a letter signed Mrs. Van Tassel, you'd scratch your head and say, 'Van Tassel, Van Tassel, where have I heard that name before?'" "This is no time to joke," he returned hurriedly. "I trust you to deliver my messages faithfully. Don't make light of the matter. Goodbye." and with a hasty bow, Paige moved briskly away. Miss Barry looked after his departing figure with some exasperation. "I hope I do him an injustice," she murmured, "but it's my opinion he hasn't found out yet that he's loving a woman instead of worshiping a saint. I don't want to be profane, but I must say I'm reminded of Anne Getchell's brother. He used to say that he liked a fool, but a darned fool he never could stand." Clover and Miss Barry sometimes began breakfast before the other and sleepier members of the family appeared on the scene. This was one of the mornings, and while Clover poured the coffee, Aunt Love embraced her opportunity. "You can't guess who's been here already," she began. "No, tell me. Don't make me guess. The day is too new." "Now, you look just fresh and bright enough to guess anything." Miss Barry gazed affectionately at her as she spoke. "I saw Mr. Page going down the street," said Clover, as she set a steaming cup on the waitress's tray. "Could it have been he?" "Yes, but you'd never 'a' guessed him, would you? He come over to get me to tell you that he's called away on important business and regrets very much breaking his engagement with you this morning about going on the Christopher Columbus." Clover's transparent skin flushed, but she looked coolly into her informant's eyes. "He does not see us again, then?" "Law, yes, in a few days he does. Lena," said Clover to the maid, "please tell Katie to keep the other things hot for a while. Miss Bryant and Mr. Van Tassel are both a little late. I will ring when I want you." The moment the door had closed behind the girl, Clover's face changed. "Tell me all about it," she said. "Ain't it a pity that Gump can't see her this minute?" thought Aunt Love. "Even if he's a darned one, I guess he'd get a glimmer of sense." "Why, he was the most distressed bein' you'd want to look at," she returned. "Just 'cause he couldn't stay and go with you on that boat. You'd think he'd never seen a sign of the fair. Not that he said a word about that. He was all taken up with the disappointment of not going with you." Aunt Love was determined to make the most of Gorham's behest to "put it strong." Clover's face had quieted, and she was occupied in stirring her coffee. "I told him I guessed you wouldn't be overly hard on him, and he told me to ask you, provided you did forgive him, to write and tell him so to this address." Clover looked up quickly as she accepted the card. "How long will he be gone?" "A week or 10 days, I think he said. Law, if I've forgotten anything he told me, I shall need the prayers of the congregation." "Strange," continued Miss Barry, slyly, "that I haven't never seen anything so severe about you that Mr. Gorham should look all beside himself at breaking a light, trifling promise to you through no fault of his." "I will write in 3 or 4 days," said Clover musingly. "That will divide the time." Then she looked up and met Aunt Love's eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her glance away. "He's a none such," said Miss Barry. "I guess you better let him off easy, Mrs. Van Tassel." "Oh, yes," returned Clover with some confusion. "I will ring for the breakfast now, Aunt Love. We will not wait any longer." Gorham Page came home to his hotel in St. Louis a few days afterward, tired and enervated by the excessive heat, and requiring to remember all his philosophy not to anathematize the fate which had snatched him from the feast spread upon the shores of Lake Michigan. A little later in the season, during the Congress of Religions, the gentle Dharmapala was riding upon the lagoon one evening, where his snowy silken robe seemed more in place than the close-fitting black of his companions. Looking about him in the waning light, where all was melody, harmony, and beauty, he said, "All the joys of heaven are in Chicago." This sentiment of the loving Singalese Page would have echoed, had the anachronism been possible. A sort of chronic yearning and dissatisfaction possessed him, and the heat in St. Louis being a tangible discomfort, he dwelt to himself upon the superior vitality in the air of the lake region, and laid his discomfort at the door of the weather. It was his custom, as soon as he entered the hotel, to inquire for letters, and today he received one in a feminine handwriting. The clerk noticed the expression of his face as the missive was handed him. "That fellow can't sing the letter I looked for never came," was his comment. Gorham's sensations, as in his room he opened the square envelope with religious care, were of a chaotic nature, which required analysis. He even went so far as to hold the folded sheet a moment and look at the opposite wall with an effort at introspection. But the insistent desire to possess himself of those written words engulfed all other considerations. The letter was gentle and friendly like the writer herself. It compassionated him on the fact which Chicago papers reported of a hot wave in St. Louis, and described her sight of a great Maharaja, the nabob then visiting the fair, who, resplendent in cloth of gold robes and pale green turban, passed in state with his suite about the grounds. Jack had surveyed him, and with democratic audacity dubbed his Highness that chocolate duffer. The little letter closed with these words: I am alone in the house, even the servants are away. It is rather a desolate sensation, and yet some people profess to feel more keenly the loneliness of being in a crowd of strangers than that of being entirely by themselves. The former is your sort of loneliness at present. I wonder if you dislike it. I wonder. You always seem so sufficient unto yourself, so much more a man of intellect than of heart. I wonder if you ever feel, as I do more and more strongly every day, our dependence on each other. There was nothing more save the conventional ending. Page scarcely glanced at the signature. Something seemed to mount to his head, as his eyes dwelt fascinated upon the last sentence recorded. The sweetness of his instant interpretation of it so possessed and intoxicated him that no other thought could obtain entrance. All the processes of his system seemed arrested for one overwhelming moment. Then the pulses, reacting, sent the blood boiling through his veins. Mechanically he rose, and going to the bureau, began throwing articles of clothing into an open valise near by. Recollecting himself, and duties still undone, he stopped these premature preparations, and, the valise happening to be the object under his vision, he gave it the most prolonged amorous gaze that ever fell to the lot of insensate leather. Then catching up the letter again, he read it over and over. That evening, a messenger boy ran up the Van Tassel steps, and 5 minutes afterward, Clover was smiling and frowning in perplexity over a telegram addressed to her. I shall come back at the first possible moment. Gorham Page. Aunt Love had brought her the message, and she in her mystification read it aloud. Something in Miss Barry's glance, as she met her eyes, made her color rise finely. You need not speak of this to Mildred, she said, after a pause, with dignity. I do not quite understand it. I don't either, thought Miss Barry, discreetly moving away. Either he's even more kinds of a gump than I thought, or else he's come to his senses with the crash. I always knew when Gorham Page did start out to love a woman something had got to break, and it ain't going to be his heart now, thank the Lord. What a pair they will make, my. Page returned on the second day toward evening. He hoped fate would favor him by sending Mildred and Jack to the illumination that night. It did not occur to him that Clover might have gone too until he neared the house. Then the thought brought dismay. He had schooled himself for days to work and conquer among dry-as-dust details of his profession. Now it seemed impossible to wait a matter of hours. There was no one on the piazza when he ascended the steps, and the evening being fine, the fact appeared sinister. Miss Barry answered his ring at the bell. "Oh, it's you, is it?" was her greeting. "Glad to see you back, Mr. Gorham. It hasn't seemed right not to have you running in every day. It is good to be here again, but I'm afraid you are alone tonight." "Yes, the young folks are down to the fair as usual." Miss Barry's keen eyes saw the disappointment in the earnest face. "I suppose like as not you wouldn't feel like going down anyway, wore out as you must be with all that heat. I would go gladly, if there were any chance of meeting them, but the people you want to meet are the ones you do not happen upon at the fair." Miss Lavina looked at him with a shrewd smile. "Then I guess you'll give me a good mark for once, for it happened to come over me that you might get home tonight, and I said as much to Miss Mildred. I asked her where they'd be, and she agreed to stay by one of the big horses till the illumination was over. What time is it? Asked Paige with sudden haste, wringing Miss Lavina's hand cordially. Oh, you've got time, I guess, observed Aunt Love, with a comfortable chuckle. Now haven't I got a head for something more'n cookies, Mr. Gorham? If I should stop to compliment you as you deserve, I should miss the appointment, was the hearty response, as the young man lifted his hat and hurried down the steps. The boy in the driver's seat of the beach wagon just passing did not bear even a faint resemblance to any conventional idea of Cupid. Yet surely no power less than that of the little god could have sent that conveyance exactly at the moment it was needed. Page felicitated himself on the occurrence, and in the whole history of the fair it is doubtful whether better time was made by a pedestrian than his record tonight between the 60th Street entrance and the Court of Honor. But for all his haste, when he reached the giant horses his friends were not there. He rushed from one to the other with frantic energy, but in vain. No familiar face and form rewarded his search. The grand court was lighted. The first playing of the electric fountains was over. Perhaps had been over for some time. Page was too dispirited to look at his watch. For him the surroundings were stale, flat, and unprofitable. Another proof that the kingdom of heaven is a condition rather than a place. He was just about moving away with a sense of disappointment, which he condemned as unreasonably keen, when there loomed up before him a vision more beautiful to his eyes than the most lovely sculptured angel in the neighborhood. Well, Jack, he exclaimed, taking his cousin's hand, here you are. I was just looking for you. Van Tassel smiled at the eager reception. Thought we had flown, did you? So we have a little way. The girls are sitting over yonder. Mildred has been sending me on periodical scouting expeditions, lest you might come down. Glad to see you back. Business go all right? Yes, I'm all right, thanks. Didn't quite get a sunstroke. Van Tassel was striding along to keep pace with Gorham, who had instantly started in the direction Jack indicated. The latter smiled, and did not make a further attempt at conversation until the settee was reached where Clover and Mildred were waiting. You did come, said the latter pleasantly. We thought you might hunt for us. It was so kind of you, exclaimed Page gratefully, as he greeted them both. Now I can draw a long breath. The four exchanged a few commonplaces concerning his trip, and then Mildred changed the subject. We have cards for a reception at the Women's Building tonight, and we have been in a dozen minds about going, but I think it would be pleasant to look in. Gorham glanced tentatively at Clover. He had not been gazing at her this evening as was his wont, and Mildred observed the change. It would be pleasant, he said, without enthusiasm. Don't let me detain you, of course. I haven't been here for what seems to me a very long time, and I don't feel inclined to go indoors. Do you especially wish to attend the reception, Mrs. Van Tassel? No, in fact, Mildred spoke quickly, for she felt her quiet sister's embarrassment. The truth may as well be told, Mr. Page. Just previous to your appearance, she had flatly refused even to approach the Women's Building, so she cannot put on airs about relinquishing a pleasure. Then we might divide, suggested Page, with so much alacrity that Mildred smiled, but the smile was fleeting. She had risen, and was standing behind her sister. Now she placed a hand on her shoulder. Oh, my friends, look! She cried suddenly, lifting her hand toward the east. The moon was rising behind the peristyle. Deep in the soft sky it shone between the lofty white columns and cast a silver sheen across the summer lake. This is Greece, and that is the Mediterranean, exclaimed Jack. Mildred, after a moment of gazing, stooped and dropped a light kiss on her sister's cheek. Goodbye, Clover. Then, with a loving pressure of the other's shoulder, she added in a jealous whisper, My Clover. As the other two moved away, Clover and Gorham rose simultaneously. I believe we had the same thought, he said, looking at her with happy eyes. Mine was to go to the Peristyle, she answered. And mine. She took his offered arm. They started down the half-deserted walk, and quickly came one of the magic changes of the place. The lights vanished, and the colossal moonlit gateway of the Peristyle gained new majesty. At last I can thank you for your letter, said Paige. Were you glad to get it? I am afraid it was not much of an epistle. As if any word you would write could be anything but precious. It breathed of you in every line. All things are made new since I read it. My whole life, all my powers, every worthy thing I may ever attain, are yours. Is it possible that you are really going to accept them? That you can care for me, Clover? She felt his strong arm tremble under her hand, and it thrilled her. But she was silent, and his impetuous speech rushed on. I have had to hold under with an iron will all my thoughts, the contradictions, the hopes and fears of the last few days. Last night I dreamed of this. We were walking together somewhere, and the moon shone on the water. I asked you to marry me, and you looked at me pityingly and said, "No." I reminded you of your letter, but still you shook your head. Clover! He spoke her name with tender appeal. They drew near the peristyle, and stepping within, walked slowly down the wondrous vista of fluted columns beneath the clusters of flower-like lights. My letter, she repeated softly. How could you value that trivial little letter so much? What was there in it? I do not even remember. Paige stood still, to look in amazement into her face. But even in his surprise it did not occur to him that she might be resorting to subterfuge. I have the letter here, he said simply, thrusting his hand into an inside pocket. We will see. Clover crimsoned to her throat. She did not wish to see the letter. She suddenly feared it. What trick had been played upon her? Could Mildred? Oh, impossible! Gorham unfolded the sheet before her reluctant gaze. Then with sudden haste she took it from him, opened it, and read the closing lines. Her breath came freer. Oh, yes, she said, smiling in her relief. I wrote that. Gorham unconsciously received the paper into his hand. He was scrutinizing her face. What did you mean by those words? He asked. Why, nothing, she answered, surprised and affected by his agitation. Nothing except what I said. Let me read it. Those last words, said Paige briefly, indicating them. Clover read obediently aloud. I wonder, you always seem so sufficient unto yourself, so much more a man of intellect than of heart. I wonder if you feel, as I do more and more strongly every day, our dependence. The voice gradually lowered, then paused. Clover cast one beseeching, troubled glance up into her companion's face. It was as pale as hers was glowing. We always have been so impersonal. Of course I meant people in general, she finished, low and quickly. Paige gave her a sad smile. We have theorized and speculated together a great deal, I know. So this was only one more speculation, was it? Why, Mr. Page, said Clover, scarcely above the breath that was failing her. How could you think? I don't know now, myself, he answered with simplicity. I suppose I was so suffused with love of you that this one hint at reciprocation set my head aflame, and brought on an attack of emotional insanity. I ask your pardon, but all the same, Clover, I am not ashamed, and I cannot regret it. It was my good angel who held your little hand while you wrote that, for it gave me moments of such happiness as I never knew before, and perhaps never shall again. Clover wanted to speak and could not. She thought if he would move or take his gaze from her face, her courage might rise. She lifted her eyes, but only far enough to note that the electric fountains were flinging their jets of color aloft, the water taking new shapes each moment with bewildering grace and rapidity. I never thought of you before as a woman whom it would be right for a man to ask to come down beside him. I did not know that my heart was reaching out toward yours until that day of the letter. Would you mind telling me, Clover, how long you have known that I loved you?" Clover drew a long, involuntary breath. "I did not know it," she said at last, looking up at him bravely. And when once her eyes were held in that compelling gaze, she did not wish to escape. "I only hoped it," she finished. The fountains fell and vanished. The dainty flame blossoms in the remote sculptured nooks overhead still added their soft radiance to that of the moon. The lovers were alone in that colossal aisle, that pillared temple, where for one transcendent moment they stood heart to heart. It was the period of shadow in the court. At the other end of the lagoon, far away through spaces of darkness, the gemmed dome of administration lifted its cameos and starry crown against the heavens. From the distance of the lighted peristyle, the deep surrounding shadows gave a supernatural effect to this single lighted edifice, whose triumphant angels seemed to move in the waving illumination thrown over them from flaming torches. It was an aerial castle with no affinity for earth, an exalting vision, such as visited the prophets of old. "Earlier in the evening," said Paige, almost too deeply moved to speak, "I would willingly have turned from the court of honor. I could not find you, and its company of angels was incomplete. Now, heaven itself lies here. I ought to be a good man, my darling. You will help me. It is a debt I shall owe forevermore." End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Sweet Clover, A Romance of the White City, by Clara Louise Burnham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by E Tayaban. Chapter 26, The New Year. The reception at the Woman's Building proved attractive. It was late when Mildred and Jack returned home that night. All was still about the house. They parted in the usual friendly fashion, which both sought to make easy, and each felt to be constrained. Mildred went quietly to her sister's door and listened. All was still. "Then she has been at home some time," thought the girl. "Good. That speaks volumes. Poor fellow, I'm sorry for him." The frou-frou of her dress as she turned away almost drowned the voice that spoke her name. Not quite, however. She turned the handle of the door. "Did you call me, Clover?" "Yes. Come in." "I didn't mean to disturb you." "Oh, I can't go to sleep. I don't want to." The speaker put out her hand and drew Mildred down on the side of the bed. The latter's eyes widened in their effort to penetrate the darkness. "Something did happen then?" "Yes, it is all right," answered Clover, and her soft, glad tone pierced to her sister's heart. "What do you mean by that?" "He does love me." What a different voice was this from the one in which she had said the same words to Jack Van Tassel 5 years ago. "Of course, but Clover, surely you don't love him," exclaimed the other, aghast. For answer, Clover took the hand she held and pressed it against her breast. "With every throb," she said slowly. Mildred stared, then threw herself face down on the pillow and wept with abandon. "Dearest, please don't," exclaimed Clover, shocked. "I must," sobbed the other. "Oh, why did we ever see him? You are all I have in the world. I hate anybody who takes you away from me." "Nobody can, dear. You know that," returned Clover, distressed by this rare flood. She slipped her arm around the recumbent form and interspersed her words with loving pats. "I am so disappointed, Millie. I thought you would be as happy as I am." "I am never as happy as you are," answered the other. "I know this is abominable, but I've got to be selfish this once. I'm just envious and miserable, Clover. Why should you always be blessing people and I never? My heart is heavy, and it hurts me all the time." In an instant, Clover sank her joy in loving compassion. It was the first admission concerning Jack that Mildred had ever made. "My poor darling, I am so sorry," she said feelingly, "and I do not see that you have done any wrong. Instead, you have been true to yourself. Anything else would have been a dreadful mistake." Mildred was so surprised that she stopped crying suddenly. "Then Jack has told you?" she said without lifting her face, a belated sob struggling in her throat. "Yes. Shouldn't you prefer to have him go away?" "No, not unless he wishes it. I would rather he stayed." "Things will come right for you, dearest. They always do when one is trying to live up to her standards and to do the best she knows how. Perhaps I have made you feel that even I thought you ought to marry him. If I have, please forgive me for adding to the cruelty of your position. I ought to have known that you would be glad, too, if it could have been Jack." Mildred rose to a sitting position. "Let us forgive mutually," she said, wiping her eyes. "I am mortally ashamed of myself for bothering you at such a time. Wait till tomorrow morning and see me redeem my character by my treatment of that thief." She stooped and kissed her sister passionately. "Why should I blame him, when I know that I would not look at any woman but you if I were a man? What a lot of trouble it would have saved me, by the way." "I don't know," returned the other with a smile. "You see, I should have been forced to refuse you." "That is just like saying you love him better than me," with quick suspicion. "No, no, only better than that man you were going to be." "Well," said Mildred, shrugging her shoulder in a characteristic gesture, "I rather think I should enjoy the refreshing change of being refused once or twice. As for you, as if I should mind your refusal, I should simply kidnap you." She stooped and laid her cheek against Clover's once more. Aunt Love was a happy woman next day. She was quite a heroine in the small family jubilation. "All my life I shall owe you 12 added hours of happiness," Paige said to her, when she gave him a rousing kiss. "Well, Mr. Gorham, you know I always was good to you," she responded radiantly, and contented herself all day by drawing Mildred off into corners to discuss this and that detail of his and her behavior during the past weeks. Trifles light as air, but confirmation strong to Aunt Love of a good time coming, and which she dwelt upon with such profound delight and secrecy that Mildred had not the heart to refuse her an audience for all the asides she chose to make. Gorham Page allowed himself a brief period in which to realize his happiness before returning to Boston, but his energies now turned willingly toward his work as the means by which he could soonest carry Clover to his own home and hers, and before he left, it had been arranged that they should be married the following spring. The day before the one set for his departure, Jack came out to Clover, who was sitting with some fancy work on the piazza. Paige was at the hotel, writing business letters. "Gorham says your cigars are too strong to be good for you," she said, looking up as he struck a match. "Yes, he has let out from the shoulder lately," returned Jack, puffing his cigar alight. "Do listen to him, Jack," said the other pleadingly. "Don't injure your health." "What is my health good for?" asked the young fellow, dropping down on the edge of the piazza, upon which he extended one leg, while he embraced the other knee as he leaned against a pillar. "Don't talk that way," said Clover. Van Tassel had never heard her use so acute a tone, and he was surprised on looking up to see her eyes swimming. "It is wicked when one has friends who love him as yours do you." "All right, Clover. Thank you. I am listening to Gorham. This cigar that I have here," he removed it from his lips and regarded it through contracted lids, "might have become sauerkraut by a little different process of handling." He smoked a minute in silence, then said, "Mildred has gone away, hasn't she?" "Yes. She has gone to spend a day or two with Helen Eames. Helen has been urging her all summer." "I think I'll go back with Gorham tomorrow," added Van Tassel briefly. "Why, Jack!" Clover dropped her work and gazed at him. "Yes, I'll go back." The young man flipped the ash from his cigar off into the grass. Do you feel that you have seen the fair? Yes, too many fairs. Jack smiled rather dolefully as he glanced up toward the blue eyes. I can't urge you to stay, said Clover sadly. Oh, perhaps I'll come back, remarked the other cheerfully. When I get my second wind, as it were. The first supply has been about knocked out of me. You don't look well. Oh, yes, I am well enough. You have behaved like an angel, Jack. He laughed. I feel a little like one of those angels on the side of the transportation building, the sort you can pass under a door without touching their buttons, you know. Did you plan to go without saying goodbye to Mildred? Oh, no. I'm glad of that. It would hurt her. No, I will run up to the Eameses this evening and kill two birds with one stone. I ought to say goodbye to Miss Eames. She has been very kind to me. That is, looking up inquiringly, if you and Gorham can spare me on your last evening, how is that? There was dew again in the violet eyes. It does not seem right for me to be happy when you are not, Jack, Clover said, unconsciously clasping her hands together. If I could only say something that would stay with you as a comfort. I am afraid to seem to preach when my own lot is what it is. You are plucky and have plenty of self-control, but I hope you will not try to lean only on your own strength. We can all have faith that, so long as we do right, the outcome will be the best thing for us, whatever it is. I'm not kicking, said Jack quietly, but I am going away because I believe it is the best thing both for Mildred and me. Does she know your intention? No, it is rather sudden. I only took it today. I have stayed here long enough to bring things the way I want them if it were on the cards. Now I will do the next best thing. A couple of days afterward, Mildred returned from her visit. She came breezily into the room where her sister was sitting. Oh, I am so glad to see you, exclaimed Clover, starting up and kissing her. Let us look at you, said Mildred, holding her off and scrutinizing her with bright, audacious eyes. No, they are not red, she continued. I thought I might be coming home to a Niobe. They are both gone, said Clover plaintively. Yes. Mildred turned away to a mirror and began removing her hat pins. I have been kept so busy consoling Helen Eames that I couldn't come home any sooner to dry your tears. Her sister looked at her inquiringly. Was there any bravado in this disappointing gaiety? Apparently not. Mankind loves a lover, and Clover, especially loving this lover, felt tempted to resentment. But might it not be that Mildred indeed felt more light-hearted than for months past? Why should she be blamed if she found relief in the knowledge that her home was free from a presence which had been in a way a constant reproach? I wish Jack did care for Helen Eames, returned the elder, unconsciously sighing. Yes, wouldn't it be convenient? I'm glad you've come home, Milly. The house has seemed so empty. Oh, but what lovely flowers! Exclaimed the latter, espying a great bowl of roses in a shaded corner. Why didn't you tell me? They are not yours, my dear. Clover smiled at her work. They came last night. They are beautiful. Did brother actually remember to have such a sweet substitute sent you on your first lonely evening? I am proud of him. What else interesting has happened? Nothing, I think. Gorham received a characteristic letter from Robert just before he left. He gave it to me to keep, with one that came from Hilda. Perhaps you would like to see it? Indeed I would. Nice, jolly Mr. Page. I wish they lived next door. Mildred took the letter Clover handed her. I'm going to read it aloud. It probably says nice things about you. Dear Gorham, so you have won that sweet woman. Blessings on you, my boy. I may be partial, but I believe you are somewhere near good enough for her. Truth compels me to state, however, that your gain is my loss, owing to the overweening satisfaction it is to Hilda. In an evil moment, I underrated her prescience when she prophesied this happy event, and the consequence is that I am considering living at the club until the first blush of her triumph passes over. It flavors the matutinal oatmeal and the after-dinner coffee. I cannot indulge in a short nap without encountering a tall nightmare in which the wife of my bosom pops out from unexpected corners and ejaculates, "I told you so." She sits opposite me now, writing a letter to go with this. I know those are burning words that are growing with such swiftness. I can almost hear the paper hiss. However, I am just as pleased as she is. Please give Clover my love. You see, I am not slow to use my privilege in naming her, and tell her I am sure the world will be a better place for such a home as you and she will make in it. Indeed, I feel more than I can say on the subject. With kind regards to all, your brother, Robert. With the early autumn came the Parliament of Religions, the Congress which, among the many that preceded and followed it, proved, to the general surprise, to be the one of greatest interest to the public. Miss Barry was indefatigable in her attendance, and her young ladies were often with her. The names of those Orientals, whose words she listened to as music, were impracticable to her, but their dark faces and graceful gestures were fixed in her mind forever. Aunt Love was one of thousands whose complacent generalization of the heathen received a blow. Clover did her share in the entertaining of some of these scholarly delegates from the Far East, and Mildred found a totally novel sauce piquant in the society of a handsome coffee-colored Indian, who wore a pink silk turban and a mouse-colored robe, and talked transcendental philosophy in the purest English while gazing at her from long, beautiful eyes. Lieutenant Eames had rejoined his regiment. Whether or no hiding a heart wound, Clover did not know. Mildred said nothing. October, the busiest, gayest month of the fair, came on. Such of society as had hitherto been obdurate, now returning from seashore and mountains, made one united, belated rush for the widely extolled exposition. The climax of attendance during one day came on October 9th, Chicago's own celebration, the anniversary of the Great Fire, when more than 750,000 persons were in the grounds. The effect, when one could rise to a slight eminence and look down, was such as is observed in a trap so full of flies that there is only a general stir and movement among the mass. No form is visible. The day was faultless. Not a cloud flecked the azure, against which shone the groups of the agricultural building, that one edifice which interposed no roof between its superb statuesque decorations and the revealing blue of the firmament. The three mammoth fountains at the end of the court of honor played in dazzling sunshine, filling the air with crystals. Clover and Mildred were present, attended by the pink turban, splendid in his unconsciousness of being regarded on all sides as a sort of embodied apotheosis of the midway. The ceremonies of the day began with what Clover's chairboy naively called a procession of the hussies, although the Chicago hussars might have taken exception to the term. From that moment until late evening, the interest was not permitted to flag. A tightrope walker in cavalier costume ran and pirouetted high in air before the peristyle, the scarlet and gold of his costume showing jewel-like against the pure columns. A large chorus sang national hymns. The young Liberty Bell pealed. Hundreds of children in fancy costumes marched around the lagoons, but the magnitude of the crowd defeated its own entertainment by the fact that the procession of elaborately prepared floats could not force their way through the avenues. It was all very wonderful, but greatest of all was the fabulous splendor of the night display. The Van Tassel party viewed it from the roof of the New York building. Surely, Chicago had earned the right to celebrate herself by bombardments of colored fire, if so it pleased her, and she did so this evening, on a scale which trebled previous efforts, and made the heavens as luminous as on that night, 22 years ago, when she was the victim instead of the instigator of her pyrotechnics. Once more the city meant to distinguish the World's Fair by novel and striking accompaniments to its intrinsic grandeur. It was intended that its close should be attended with a metaphorical flourish of trumpets. But close upon this last day, shame and affliction visited Chicago in the murder of its mayor, and all festivities were renounced. The last hours of the existence of the dream city were mournfully quiet. A bubble is always most beautiful just before it vanishes, Mildred said to Clover, as they stood together in the court of honor on that afternoon, waiting for the fateful moment. It never looked more lovely, replied Clover. They spoke softly, as in a holy place, and with one accord looked up at the infinite message in carven letters, the significant legacy of the summer's grand experience. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. A strain of solemn sweetness sounded through the harmonies that poured without ceasing from the orchestra in a neighboring pavilion, touching every heart in that waiting throng. The rays of the low-hanging sun shot for one moment past the side of the administration building, gleamed through the waters of the fountain, and traveled a swift path across the lagoon to illume for an instant the golden republic. "It is the swan song!" exclaimed Mildred. A long, sullen roar sounded from the east. It was the first peal of the salute which bade the dream city vanish. The sisters clasped hands, as they had once before in the selfsame spot. The eyes that had sought each other, dark with excitement and anticipation that day, now saw through mists of tears. The myriad flags they had seen unfurled in gladness now with one accord slipped down from sight, and the music died as the message from the cannon's mouth told the country around that all was over. Jack had been with them on the opening day. Mildred could recall how earnest and handsome he looked, standing with his hat off, carried away by the spirit of the occasion. A great wave of compassion swept over her heart and mingled with the yearning and sense of loss in the air. The weather was chill now and cloudy. She was glad to slip her arm through Clover's and hurry home. Soon after this, Aunt Love returned to Pearfield. There was some discussion as to whether she should take Blitzen, but that sagacious animal, as was usual when anything inimical to his interests was in the air, seemed fully aware of her doubts, lost his high spirits, haunted her like a silent ghost, walked when she walked, sat when she sat, and whined as he gazed at her, until the persecuted woman yielded to his mute entreaties. Electra stayed and remained the heroine of her latticed enclosure, an additional reason for Blitzen to prefer returning to his native heath. Aunt Love's farewell by no means was a sad one. She was radiant as she remarked how soon Clover would be her neighbor. "And in that way we'll get you, too," she said to Mildred, but that young woman demurred. "Of course she will come," said Clover. "I'm not sure," persisted the younger. "Well now, my dear," said Miss Barry in parting advice, "don't you wander through the woods too long and take up with a crooked stick at last. But whatever you do, marry a man of your own color, who wears a hat and coat instead of a turban and a bath wrapper. Remember that." "I don't know," responded Mildred, with a teasing smile. "The pink turban says he has a pair of very handsome diamond earrings. Perhaps if I should have my ears pierced, he would let me wear them a part of the time." "Go away!" exclaimed Miss Barry, with a repudiatory gesture. The old Scotch housekeeper soon returned, joyful to be back again, and felicitating herself that the fair was safely over, and life might have been supposed to move on as before, but it did not. Clover had come into a new state of existence, the deep, constant joy of which she never expressed in words. Except for the framed photograph on her dressing table, Mildred might have believed her equable sister to be unchanged in thought as well as habit. But Mildred's own mode of life was noticeably changed this season. The winter was a hard one. Cold weather set in November, and the reaction from the great business activity of the year before caused a depression cruelly felt among the poor. Charitable work was the order of the day, and Mildred entered into it, heart and soul. Slumming was never so fashionable, she said, and thus lightly accounting for the new direction of her energy, she learned novel views of life, which would modify her character in all time to come. Clover was her efficient aide, and her friend Helen Eames sometimes went on these expeditions too, under the shadow of her wing. It was rather a grievance with Helen that Mildred never of her own accord referred to Jack, and if questioned, made brief replies. Mr. Van Tassel was a Chicago man and belonged here. He was, in Helen's own phraseology, perfectly fascinating, and not to be lightly dropped. She intended to keep herself posted as to the probabilities of his return, but Mildred early nipped her plans in the bud. "We can't reckon on Mr. Van Tassel as a Chicagoan any more," she said. "He is reading law very earnestly now in Boston, and he has lived there so many years. It is home to him. Besides that, he is devoted to Clover, and when she is married to his cousin, that will be another tie to keep him at the East." Upon which Miss Eames grew thoughtful, and Fortune shortly after throwing in her way an invitation to visit a friend in Boston, she incontinently dropped her pilgrimages amid Chicago's back streets, and departed on the most limited train available. Soon afterward, Mildred received a gay letter from her. Mr. Van Tassel had called, and had been one of the theater party her hostess had given the night before. She was having a charming time, and hoped dear Mildred would not take something in those dreadful basements before she could return to help her again. "Wouldn't it be strange," Clover asked, when her sister showed her the letter, "if little Helen should catch Jack's heart on the rebound after all?" Mildred returned her look with unusual gravity. "Are men's hearts so unfaithful, do you think?" she asked seriously. "Sometimes," answered Clover, "when they despair, and women's too." "Then they are unworthy," Mildred said quietly. No winter ever suffered more than this by contrast with the summer. In public print and by private hearsay, the bitter needs of the poor surrounded one. The corpse of the White City lay wrapped in a winding sheet of snow. The sisters never entered the grounds from the afternoon its spirit departed. They looked askance, in passing, at the buildings, with their cold, silent surroundings, where so recently all had been life and warmth. The same domes and facades upreared under the cold sky. One could only say, as he does in glancing tenderly and sadly at a dear, dead face, "How natural it looks." Little wonder that plans were innumerable for preserving a portion of that dream of beauty, to be resuscitated and to become the joy of one more summer. But the work of spoliation had begun, and would march on inexorably. "Miss Mildred has grown awful quiet, Mrs. Van Tassel," said old Jeanie one day in confidence. "It's wrong you're doing her, I'm thinking, letting her quench all her bright spirits in those holes she visits." "I think not, Jeanie," Clover replied. "Miss Mildred is having a deep experience, but we can't help the sorrow in the world except by coming close to it." "I saw tears in her eyes the other night," whispered Jeanie profoundly, "and I asked the poor child why, and what do you suppose she answered? I suppose she had the heartache over some of our new friends. Maybe, but if she did, she wouldn't acknowledge it. She said 'twas because the Chicago Beach Hotel was closed for the season, and there couldn't be any dances there." Clover smiled. "That sounds as if her spirits had not all departed," she remarked. But she had been quick to observe the alteration in Mildred. Sometimes she hoped that Jack's absence had wrought the fulfillment of his desire, but she did not seek to probe her sister's feeling. If unseen influences were expanding the entrance to the holy of holies in the young girl's heart, what right had she to interfere? Sometimes she feared Mildred was depressed by the prospect of a marriage which would break up this home. Whatever the cause, the fact remained that her sister's interest in society had waned, and the part she kept up in it was perfunctory, and did not extend beyond those efforts which courtesy demanded. She had never been more companionable with Clover, however, and the latter had never enjoyed her so much. Thus matters stood when the new year was ushered in. The day was clear and bright, and many thousands took advantage of the fact that Jackson Park passed back today into the public jurisdiction. Curiosity seekers and vandals poured down the strangely mute midway plazance and through the avenues of the park. Clover and Mildred did not swell the number who gaily parodied "after the ball." And now was to come the long pull and the strong pull of winter. Mildred wondered in her own mind why the prospect should look so very dreary. No other season had ever seemed like it. Doubtless it was her new and close acquaintance with the griefs of others that had changed the world and made life a novel sort of struggle. The new year was less than a week old when Clover received a letter from Jack, announcing his intention to make them a call. "I won't give any excuses," he wrote. "I admit that I am coming simply because I want so much to see Mildred and you that I believe I shall do better work after indulging in that pleasure." "Loyal as ever," said Clover, looking up, and Mildred did not raise her eyes from her work, but she was smiling. Jack had said he could not set a precise time for his arrival, but that in a few days they might expect him to drop down. When his determination had been taken, Van Tassel pushed forward his preparations with all his haste, and his restlessness did not quiet until he found himself, in the early evening of the 8th of January, walking down the old familiar home street once more. As he reached the corner, he suddenly observed that clouds of smoke mingled with large red cinders were rolling up from the south. "Must be a fire in the fairgrounds," he thought. "I wonder if the girls know." They were coming out of their door, with their outside wraps on, when Van Tassel came up the steps, and they gave him a greeting in which excitement and cordiality mingled. "There is a fire in the fair," they all three said at once. "You will take me down there, Jack," exclaimed Mildred. "Clover was going, but she hasn't been well and she ought not to." Clover protested faintly, suggesting some of the rites of hospitality for Jack's benefit, but he would hear nothing save carrying out Mildred's wishes, and after taking a moment to deposit his bag in the hall, he set off beside her. "How is Gorham, I wonder?" murmured Clover with a comical little smile and plaintive raised eyebrows, as she looked after the figures retreating into the dark. "I feel as if I had been in a whirlwind." She looked toward the once gay hotel. Now its many sightless eyes gazed blankly southward. "I will go there!" she exclaimed with sudden determination, and re-entering the house, she called Jeanie and made her hurry into her wraps. The housekeeper obeyed, with many a fussy groan over her mistress's caprice, and soon they were walking northward. They ascended the dark stairway to the piazza of the hotel, and peered through the door at the office, where one dim light showed. Clover was a bit frightened, but she knocked on the glass. A man appeared behind the office desk, and picking up the lantern, which was the vast hotel's single attempt at illumination, advanced through dark spaces, casting strange shadows on the marble floor as he came. "May we look at the fire from here?" asked Clover, wishing Gorham were with her rather than Jeanie. "Yes, I see they've got a fire down there," the man remarked imperturbably, but he stood back for them to enter, and then clanged the heavy door behind them. It echoed in the big, empty hall, and Jeanie looked so discomfited that Clover smiled, though she herself thought the situation rather eerie. The last time she had stood there, the place had been ablaze with electric light and gay with music and guests. She had ascended with her friends to a balcony to view the lighted white city in the zenith of its beauty, and to revel in the fiery marvels which mirrored themselves in the lake. It flashed into her memory how enthusiastic the crowds had been over the rising of a slender cylinder of light which poised itself aloft, then slowly unrolled until the stars and stripes appeared in the heavens. She could hear again the patriotic salutes from a congregation of boats as Old Glory sailed away across the lake. Now all was hushed and dark. A second man, who appeared in the office, struck a match and lit another lantern, by whose light he proceeded to pilot the two women upstairs. Jeanie muttered and grunted to such an extent that Clover relented after the ascent of 3 flights, and the old man led her to the window of one of the white-sheeted bedrooms, from which she eagerly looked. "Oh, Jeanie, I am sure it is the Peristyle!" she exclaimed, gazing horror-struck on the volume of fire and smoke visible through the bare ribs of the spectatorium. What will Mr. Page say?" Involuntarily she pressed her hand on her beating heart, seeming to hear the roar of those cruel flames. Meanwhile, Mildred and Jack had caught a train, which they left at 60th Street. The young man was glad that the tension of his anticipations had been relieved by the unconventional circumstances of his welcome. To be joined with Mildred in the present excitement was far preferable to the doubtful home evening he had looked forward to. Arm in arm, they pressed forward against the cold lake wind toward the shore, and did not pause until they had neared the music hall. Only once Mildred spoke as they hurried on. "I am afraid," she said breathlessly, "that it is a peristyle." "It looks like it," said Jack briefly. The hoofs of galloping horses smote the hard ground, and the puffing of fire engines was borne to their ears before they reached the scene of confusion. There they stood still, Mildred clinging with both hands to Van Tassel's arm, her wide, horrified eyes fixed on the blazing casino, the building into which the peristyle merged at the southern end, as it did into Music Hall on the north. The lagoon was coated with a thin sheet of ice, across which the sparks, after circling around the head of the golden goddess, whirled up the court of honor in lines of fire. Above, the wind bore the glowing brands swirling over the great neighboring buildings. Streams of water fell with no quenching power into the flames. "Why don't they bend all their energies to saving the peristyle?" exclaimed Mildred. "That is what they are doing now. See?" The dauntless firemen were fighting the flames at close range. A dozen streams of water at once were directed upon the peristyle, but in vain. The walls of the casino crashed in. Devouring tongues of fire fastened upon the first noble pillar and ate upward. Van Tassel felt his companion shudder in her furs, and put his hand on hers. The crowd that had gathered in the very spot where they cheered the summer's pyrotechnic display were strangely motionless and silent, watching with fascinated eyes and saddened faces as the fire crept upward, leaping from pillar to pillar, ascending toward the statues which stood serene and fair above smoke and flame long after the watchers expected them to succumb. At last, each white figure in turn, seeming suddenly to become aware of its environment, wavered on its pedestal, hesitated, and with one shrinking look below, plunged downward into the fiery chasm. "Jack!" gasped Mildred, shivering from head to foot, her dilated eyes never leaving the heart-rending sight. For an instant, free of smoke and illumined gloriously, shone out for the last time the heavenly promise, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." "The quadriga!" groaned Van Tassel, for the grand arch was seized upon and swiftly melted away in the furnace. No searchlight of the summer ever compared in grandeur with the effect that succeeded to the crumbling of the staff below the famous group, the pride of the noble peristyle. The iron skeleton supports, laid bare, were invisible in the night. Columbus, his chariot, the outriders with their banners, and the spirited horses led by maidens, stood triumphant in the vivid light. It was a sight of supernatural beauty. In the glare of the leaping flames, the snow-white horses seemed to stir restlessly and paw the air, as they arched their necks and gazed proudly down into the glowing chasm. "Jump! Oh, jump!" cried Mildred. Then, unable to endure the impending catastrophe, her nerves strained to the utmost, she turned with a wild movement, and sobbing, hid her head on Jack's breast. He put his arms around her. The the peristyle has gone," she exclaimed chokingly. "Gone back to heaven." "Yes, darling," he answered close to her ear. "My rival. Forgive me, but you are making me so happy I can't realize anything except that I have you in my arms. What does it mean? Only that you are overwrought?" Mildred lifted her face slightly, but away from the burning pyre. "Your rivals are all gone, Jack," she said, as steadily as she could speak. "Even I do not count." Half an hour afterward, Clover heard them enter the house and hurried down to the parlor. When she pushed aside the portiere and entered, she paused in amazement, and her heart leaped up, for Jack's arms were about Mildred, and his lips were pressed to hers. They saw her, and in another instant she was beside them, her hands clasped in theirs. As she gazed at her sister, mute for joy, Mildred regarded her with a tender version of her beautiful smile. "I believe," she said, "this lifts the last cloud from Clover's horizon." "Yes," answered the latter rather unsteadily. "The world has never looked so bright to me as now. I think, Jack," turning to him, her face aglow, "heaven itself must have grown happier tonight." Van Tassel's eyes shone wistfully. "I hope he knows," he answered gently. End of Sweet Clover, A Romance of the White City by Clara Louise Burnham.